Settle in and welcome to HistSleep. Today, we gently step into the quiet winter of 19th century America, where Christmas arrived slowly and the world felt softer, darker, and calm. A winter that arrived slowly before the age of bright lights. Winter did not hurry into 19th century America. It did not arrive with flashing decorations, electric windows, or glowing streets. Instead, it came quietly, almost politely, like a guest that knew how to knock without making a sound, long before strings of colored bulbs wrapped around houses and shops. Winter made its entrance through subtle signs that were easy to miss, unless one was watching closely. The first hint was always in the air. The warmth of late autumn would begin to loosen its hold. Not suddenly, but gently. The wind shifted direction, carrying with it a faint scent of frost and distant wood smoke. People did not check weather apps or radio forecasts. They simply felt the change in their bones, in the way their breath grew visible in the mornings, and the way the ground turned harder beneath their boots. In small towns and isolated farms, the days shortened almost unnoticed. The sun slipped lower in the afternoon sky, casting longer shadows across dirt roads and frozen fields. There were no streetlights to brighten the early darkness, only the quiet acceptance that evening now arrived sooner and stayed longer. Families adjusted their rhythms to the light, finishing outdoor work while the faint winter sun still lingered above the horizon. Before electric lamps filled homes with steady brightness, darkness was a real and familiar presence. It gathered in corners of wooden rooms and waited patiently by closed shutters. Children grew up understanding the weight of nighttime, not fearing it, but respecting it. Shadows were not something to be chased away by a switch, but something to be lived. Alongside winter in that time was not announced by advertisements or holiday music playing in stores. There were no glowing windows filled with ornaments or mannequins dressed in festive clothing. Instead, winter announced itself through the slow freezing of rivers, the stiffening of muddy paths, and the quiet sound of frost creeping across window pane. During the night, people prepared in a different way. They did not rush to buy decorations or gifts the moment winter approached. What mattered most was warmth, light, and food. Firewood was stacked higher beside houses, neatly arranged against the sides of barns and fences. Every log represented another hour of heat in the long, cold months ahead. Every split piece of wood was a small promise that the family inside would not be left in darkness or cold. Windows were carefully checked, cracks filled with cloth or paper to keep the bitter air outside. Heavy curtains were hung to hold the warmth close. Floors were swept clean, not for guests, but to make the home feel tighter, safer, and more protected from the quiet cold that pressed from every side. The world outside began to soften its sounds. Birds grew quieter. Insects disappeared entirely. Even the usual busy noises of farm life slowed down, as if the land itself was learning how to rest. Horses' hooves sounded different on frozen ground, more solid, more final. Wagon wheels creaked, louder in the crisp air, every sound carrying farther in the stillness. Winter before bright lights was a season of patience. People learned to move more slowly, to speak more softly, and to listen more carefully. Without the constant hum of electricity, there was space for thoughts to stretch out and settle. Evenings were not filled with screens or glowing buttons. Instead, people sat close to the fire, watching the quiet dance of flames against stone and iron. The cold itself was not just a feeling, it was a presence, like another layer of the world. It slipped through loose boards and under doorways. It wrapped around bare branches and rested heavily on farmhouse roofs. Yet, it was not rushed or violent. It moved at its own steady pace, shaping daily life without ever needing to announce its power. Roads became lonelier. As winter drew closer, fewer wagons traveled long distances. Neighbors visited less often, not out of unkindness, but because the journey itself became slower and harder. A simple trip could take half a day when snow covered the landmarks and the wind erased familiar tracks. Inside the homes, time felt different. Clocks still ticked, but minutes stretched in the quiet. Families rose with the weak light of dawn and rested soon after sunset, guided not by schedules, but by the natural limits of day and night. The world beyond their windows felt larger and quieter, as if the sky itself had lowered to rest gently upon the earth. There was no rush to celebrate yet, no bright ribbons, no sparkling windows, no flood of sound and color to announce that something special was coming. Winter was not a spectacle. It was simply a season that arrived as it always had, slowly, calmly, and without asking for attention. In the stillness, people found a kind of comfort that is difficult to imagine today. Silence was not empty. It was full of the soft crackle of fire, the faint whistle of wind, and the steady breathing of a house that was alive with warmth and quiet life inside its wooden walls. And as the first snow began to fall, lightly, at first almost unsure of itself, the world stepped into a softer version of itself. Roofs turned pale. Fence posts wore thin white caps. Footprints appeared for a moment and then slowly disappeared again, as if the earth was learning how to forget. This was how winter truly arrived in 19th century America. Not with brightness, noise, or urgency, but with patience, shadow, and a deep, steady calm. It was a winter that did not demand attention. It simply settled in, quietly, waiting. Small wooden homes, quietly preparing for the coldest nights of the year. Small wooden homes stood patiently across the American landscape, scattered along frozen dirt paths, tucked beside bare trees, and resting quietly near fields that had already said goodbye to their last harvest. These homes were not large, and they were not bright. They were simple, steady structures built from rough-cut timber, held together by iron nails and the slow knowledge of hands that understood both wood and weather. As winter slowly tightened its grip, these houses began their silent preparation for the coldest nights of the year. There were no loud announcements, no decorated storefronts, and no rush of excitement in the air. The work of preparing for winter was quiet, private, and deeply familiar to every family who lived within these wooden walls. Inside, the floors were swept more carefully, not out of formality, but because dust and loose straw seemed to hold the cold. Walls were inspected by lamplight, and every narrow gap between boards was noticed. Old newspapers, scraps of cloth, and thin strips of wood were pressed into cracks to block the creeping wind that learned how to slip through even the smallest spaces. Fireplaces became the heart of the home. Ash was cleaned out and replaced with fresh kindling. The stone around the firebox was checked for damage, and the iron tools that tended the flames were laid neatly in their familiar places. Everything had a purpose, and everything was placed where hands could find it in the dark. Beds were moved slightly closer to the warmest parts of the room. Mattresses were stuffed with fresh straw, which gave off a dry, grassy scent that mixed gently with smoke and pine resin. Thick wool blankets were checked for holes, brushed clean, and folded carefully at the foot of each bed as if they were being persuaded to be ready for their long duty. The windows of these homes changed as winter approached. Thin, summer curtains were replaced with heavier cloth. Wooden shutters were repaired and tested, opened and closed several times to make sure they would not fail on the night the wind howled hardest. Glass panes were cleaned, not for beauty, but so that families could see the early signs of snow arriving. Outside, the yards transformed into places of careful organization. Firewood was no longer stacked loosely. Each log was placed with intention, protected from the snow by simple shelters made of spare boards or old sheets of tin. The stacks grew taller and neater, as if the family could measure their safety by their height. Smoke began to rise more often from chimneys. Not thick, careless smoke, but thin, steady lines that told silent stories across the pale sky. Each column of smoke meant a home was alive, warmed, and guarded against the creeping cold that rested across the fields like a heavy blanket. Pantries were quietly adjusted. Jars of preserved fruits were moved closer to the stove where they would not freeze. Dried corn and smoked meats were checked, counted, and sometimes rewrapped in cloth to make sure they would last through the hardest weeks of winter. Nothing inside these homes was wasted. Everything had earned its place through careful planning and long memory. Children felt the change in ways they could not fully explain. They noticed how their parents walked more slowly, how voices softened as the cold approached. Laughter became quieter, not because there was less joy, but because sound itself seemed to travel differently in the winter air. Even the smallest movements inside the home felt wrapped in the gentle hush of the coming season. The night air grew sharper. Frost formed delicate patterns on the inside of window panes, tracing silent leaves and branches in white lines that disappeared when the morning fire was lit. These patterns were never named or recorded. They were simply seen, briefly, and then allowed to fade. Water buckets began to freeze if left too close to the door. Families learned exactly where to place everything so that warmth could be preserved. Even a few inches of distance could decide whether ice would appear by morning. Roofs were checked for loose shingles. Fences were strengthened with extra posts pressed deep into hardened soil. Everything felt slower, but nothing was careless. Each small task carried the quiet understanding that winter did not forgive laziness, but it respected patience. At night, the wooden walls seemed to hold their breath. They expanded slightly with the cold, making soft, creaking sounds that families had grown used to hearing. These sounds were not frightening. They were familiar, like a house shifting gently in its sleep. Lanterns burned a little earlier each evening. The yellow light spilled across floors, made smooth by many years of footsteps. Shadows rested calmly along the walls, no longer rushed by the long, fading light of warmer seasons. There was no complaint in these homes. Hardship was expected, but so was comfort. The kind of comfort that came not from luxury, but from knowing everything had been prepared by careful hands and quiet tradition. And as the coldest nights slowly moved closer, these small wooden homes stood ready, filled with warmth, heavy blankets, and the silent strength of simple living, waiting quietly, preparing for what the dark winter skies had not yet fully revealed. The smell of pine branches filling simple one-room houses. In the quiet days leading deeper into winter, a new scent slowly began to drift through simple one-room houses across 19th century America. It was not a sharp smell, and it was not sudden. It arrived the way winter itself had arrived, gently, patiently, and without demanding attention. The scent of pine carried with it the memory of forests, of cold air moving through green branches, and of hands that had carefully gathered these simple pieces of the outdoors and brought them inside. Families did not set out looking for decoration in the way people would many decades later. Pine branches were not hung to impress visitors or to follow any fashion. They were brought inside because they were familiar. In a world of bare trees and frozen ground, these branches carried a quiet sense of life. They were trimmed and placed inside small wooden homes, not to celebrate loudly, but to soften the space and make it feel cared for. The branches often came from trees that stood just beyond the edge of cleared fields. Men and sometimes older boys would walk out early in the morning, their boots pressing shallow marks into the thin snow. They carried small axes or handsaws, not to cut whole trees, but to take only what was needed. The forest gave freely, and people learned to take gently. A few branches were enough. They never took more than the home could hold. When the branches were brought indoors, they were shaken lightly to release the last dust of snow and ice. The needles would fall softly onto the packed wooden floors, leaving behind a faint green scent that lingered far longer than the fallen needles themselves. The branches were then leaned into corners of the room or tied together with rough string and hung near the hearth, where the air was warm enough to release their natural oils. As the days passed, the pine smell slowly filled every corner of the one-room house. It blended with the scent of burning firewood, warm bread, and wool blankets. It became part of the home's winter identity. It was not strong enough to overwhelm. It simply rested in the air, steady and reassuring, as if the forest itself had quietly come inside to stand beside the family. In these one-room houses, everything existed together in the same space. There were no separate bedrooms, no long hallways, no distant kitchens. The sleeping area, the cooking space, and the family table all lived within the same four walls. Because of this, the scent of pine did not remain in one corner. It traveled everywhere. It lingered in clothing hung to dry. It settled softly into pillows and blankets. It mixed gently into hair and skin. Children felt the scent before they understood it. To them, pine did not carry the meaning of seasons or symbolism. It simply meant that something had changed. The air felt different. It felt fuller, deeper, more alive. When they lay down at night on pallets near the fire, the smell of pine branches folded around them like an extra blanket, silent and unseen. Often, these branches were placed above doorways or near windows, not as charms or decorations, but as quiet markers of passing time. In a world without calendars on every wall, people watched their lives through small changes like this. When pine branches appeared indoors, it meant that the deepest part of the year was approaching. The branches dried slowly in the warm air near the hearth. Their needles became lighter in color. They curled gently inward. When touched, they made the softest sound, like a whisper. Even the smallest movement of air caused them to stir, releasing another faint layer of their scent, refreshing the room without effort. There was no rush to replace them, no thought of when they would be taken down. They stayed as long as they felt right. Winter was not controlled by strict dates or numbers. It was felt through the body, through the air, and through habits that had existed long before anyone thought to question them. Sometimes, small bits of ribbon or simple strands of yarn were tied to the branches by children who wanted to make them more colorful. The yarn was never perfectly straight. The knots were clumsy, but no one corrected them. These tiny touches were not for perfection. They were for comfort, The house accepted them the way it accepted everything else. Quietly, warmly, and without judgment. The smell of pine was strongest in the evenings, when the doors were closed and the fire burned low and steady. The air grew heavier, richer. The scent hovered in the dim light of the flames, resting against the walls and ceiling. It soothed thoughts. It slowed movements. It made time feel less sharp. Visitors sometimes noticed it before they spoke. When neighbors stepped inside after long walks through snow and wind, they would pause for a moment without realizing why. It was the pine. It told them, without words, that this home was warm, that the space was safe, that life inside moved slowly and carefully. Pine branches also brought memory. Even for adults, the scent had a way of opening quiet doors in the mind. It reminded them of winters from years past, of parents who had once placed branches in corners of other small wooden houses, of childhood rooms lit only by firelight and lantern glow. Smell carried history more gently than words ever could. As the branches continued to dry, the needles sometimes fell. They gathered in thin lines along the edges of the floorboards. No one hurried to sweep them away. They belonged there. They were part of winter now, like frost on the windows or smoke rising from the chimney dot. And slowly, without ceremony, the scent became part of the breathing of the house itself. It was no longer noticed directly. It simply existed, steady, calm, familiar. The forest had not disappeared in winter. It had only moved indoors, piece by piece, branch by branch, breath by breath. And inside these one-room houses, the pine smell rested quietly in the air, waiting, lingering, softening every passing hour. As the season moved ever deeper into stillness and into a silence that had not yet finished revealing its full, quiet power. When candles were the only Christmas lights families had, in a time before electricity brightened every corner of the home, Christmas evenings were illuminated by a soft, flickering glow that seemed almost alive. Families relied entirely on candles, their gentle flames casting long, quivering shadows on the rough-hewn walls of one-room houses. The light was modest, yet there was a kind of magic in the simplicity and intimacy that modern bulbs and strings of electric lights could scarcely replicate. Children, their faces flushed from the cold outside, would gather near the hearth, eyes reflecting the warm golden shimmer, listening to the crackle of logs, as if the fire itself were telling stories of old. Every home had its own collection of candles, some made at home from tallow or beeswax, others traded from distant towns. These candles were precious, not merely for their ability to produce light, but for the care with which they were used. A candle burned slowly, and families learned the quiet patience of making a small flame last through the long winter evening. Fathers would trim the wicks carefully, while mothers kept a watchful eye, ensuring that no accidental drafts extinguished the comforting glow. The act of lighting the first candle for Christmas Eve was often a family ritual, a moment of anticipation that marked the official beginning of the holiday. The shadows cast by candlelight created a world that was both familiar and mysterious. Furniture that was plain by day took on strange dancing forms at night. Walls seemed to breathe, and corners where children had stored their small toys became secret places that promised quiet adventure. The flickering light encouraged storytelling. It demanded patience and attentiveness. Fathers would recount the days before, when families gathered around the hearth not for entertainment, but for necessity. And slowly, these tales became intertwined with the traditions of Christmas itself. The young ones listened, rapt and silent, often imagining themselves walking through the snow-covered streets of towns they had never seen, feeling the cold bite against their cheeks, even as the candlelight kept the chill at bay indoors. Candles were not only for warmth and light, they were central to decoration and symbolism. Families would place them in windows to signal welcome to neighbors passing through the snow-laden roads. An early tradition of holiday hospitality, the soft glow promised safety and camaraderie, and it invited a sense of quiet reflection that modern spectacles often overwhelm. In many households, the scent of burning tallow mingled with the sharp, refreshing aroma of pine branches, creating a combination that children learned to associate intimately with the season. There was an earthy, honest quality to this reminder of the modest comforts of home during a time when extravagance was rare and patience was a virtue. Even the process of arranging candles held a gentle ceremony. In wealthier households, small candelabras adorned the table, often set with care to balance light across the entire room. In simpler homes, jars, tin cups, or even small carved hollows in logs served as holders. Every flicker, every glow was deliberate, a reminder that the celebration was about presence and attention rather than abundance. The very act of lighting a candle became a meditation on gratitude and shared experience. Children learned the rhythm of quiet observation, of noticing the small interplay of light and shadow, and often without realizing it. They were practicing the art of stillness, a rare luxury in modern life. Evenings extended into the night. With this slow, deliberate light, meals were shared by candle glow, and stories were told with pauses long enough for the imagination to wander freely. No corner of the household was too mundane to be transformed by the dancing light, and the sense of anticipation for Christmas morning built with a gentle crescendo. Neighbors might hear soft laughter drifting through open windows, the clink of utensils, and the quiet murmur of songs hummed from memory rather than printed on cards. Every sound was amplified slightly in the hushed air, reminding the inhabitants of the value of the moment and the ephemeral nature of the simple illumination. The preparation for candlelit Christmas did not end with merely lighting them. Families carefully planned their evening around the available light, choosing activities that were gentle on the eyes, yet rich in engagement. Children practiced simple games, often creating miniature towns or scenes from memory, while parents mended clothing, wrapped small gifts, or read aloud from worn books. The very slowness of the candles burning became a guide to pacing, instilling a natural rhythm to the night. As the candles dwindled, conversations slowed, voices softened, and eventually, even the youngest ones found sleep beside the flickering warmth, a sense of peace washing over them as they drifted into dreams of snowy mornings and the surprise of small gifts. By the time the last candle sputtered and burned down, families understood the quiet power of light in darkness. It was not the brilliance that mattered, but the presence, the shared experience, the act of waiting together. The glow left an imprint, subtle yet enduring, reminding children that Christmas was a season defined not by spectacle, but by attention, care, and the gentle magic of a simple, flickering flame. In homes across 19th century America, the candlelight became a silent companion to memory, a witness to laughter, whispers, and the slow, comforting rhythm of winter nights. Children waiting patiently for gifts that were rare, not expected. The children did not rush toward Christmas in 19th century America. They waited for it the way they waited for sunrise. In winter slowly, without certainty that it would bring anything more than another cold day. There were no bright shop windows to press their faces against. No endless lists of wishes written for parents to fulfill. Wanting too much was considered dangerous. Desire had to be small, careful, and controlled. In a narrow wooden house at the edge of a snowy town, a young boy named Samuel sat on the floor beside the hearth, tracing patterns in the ash with one finger. The fire was low and steady. His mother had taught him not to waste wood. Every log mattered in December. The flames had to last through the night if possible. His breath lifted softly in the cold air as he watched the embers glow and fade. He had been told, as he was every year, that Christmas was not about gifts. It was about gratitude. It was about faith. It was about remembering what had already been given: the roof above, the bread on the table, the hands that worked, and the hands that prayed. Yet even with all that said, the smallest part of his heart still wondered. Sometimes, late at night, he imagined what it might feel like to open his hands and find something resting there that had not been there before. Across the room, his younger sister Emma sat on a three-legged stool, winding a loose thread around her finger, then unwinding it again. She did not speak of Christmas at all. She had learned early that asking for things made adults quiet in a dangerous way. Instead, she listened. She listened to the crackle of the fire. She listened to the wind moving through the loose boards of the wall. She listened for any sound that might mean the world was about to change, if only a little. Their father came in just as the sky darkened outside the window, his boots heavy with snow. He stamped them once on the wooden floor, then again more gently, trying not to wake the boards too loudly. Cold followed him inside like a ghost. He smelled of frozen wool and smoke from the mill. Samuel looked up quickly. Every evening, he did this, hoping that one day his father might bring something unexpected in his coat pocket. A ribbon, a whistle, a sweet, anything small enough to hide in a hand. But his father never carried such things. Tonight was no different. His hands were empty. His face was tired. "Did you finish your reading?" his father asked quietly. Samuel nodded. Emma slid off her stool and came to stand beside them both. The family gathered near the fire without speaking much. Silence was not uncomfortable in their home. It was familiar. It was as steady as the cold. Later that night, after the bread had been eaten and the dishes rinsed with water from the freezing bucket, the children were sent to bed. The bedroom was unheated. Frost traced the inside of the window glass in delicate white veins. Samuel and Emma climbed beneath thick, heavy blankets that smelled faintly of wool and smoke. Their bodies made a small pocket of warmth together. "Do you think there will be anything this year?" Emma whispered. Finally, Samuel did not answer right away. He had learned that hope needed to be handled carefully. Too much of it could break. "I don't know," he said at last. "Sometimes there is. Sometimes there isn't." Emma turned onto her side. "Last year, there was the apple." He smiled in the darkness. He remembered it well. A single red apple, wrapped in a scrap of cloth. It had been sweet. Sweeter than anything they had ever tasted. They had cut it into 4 pieces so both parents could have a share. No one complained. No one asked for more. They slept to the sound of the wind pressing against the house. Days passed slowly as Christmas drew nearer. The children did what children had always done: fed the chicken, fetched water, swept ash, helped mend clothing. By the fire, their hands were small, but already knew the shape of work. Every task had weight. Every mistake mattered. At the general store, Samuel sometimes saw boys who lived nearer the center of town. Their fathers owned land. Their mothers wore finer coats. Once, he saw a boy holding a wooden train with painted wheels behind the glass counter. The boy pressed it along the edge of the display as if it were already his. Samuel watched from the doorway, his hands deep in his pockets, and told himself not to stare. Envy was another thing his parents warned against. It was a quiet thief of peace. On Christmas Eve, snow began to fall just before dark. Not fast, not heavy, just enough to soften the world. Every sound outside grew distant. Even the mill became quiet. The town held its breath. Inside the house, their mother stirred a small pot over the fire. Dried apples floated in the water. The room filled with a faint sweetness. It was not a feast, but it felt different from every other night. The air itself seemed to slow down. Their father sat at the table, carving thin strips of wood with his knife. Each movement was careful. Each curl fell softly onto the floor. The children did not yet know what he was making. He worked with his back turned, not out of secrecy, but because the light was better there. Later, when it was time for bed, he placed two small shapes on the table near the fire. He did not make a ceremony of it. He said nothing at all. Samuel stepped forward first. His hands trembled as he reached out. The wood was smooth, cool. It fit into his palm perfectly. It was a small horse, simple in shape, with no painted detail, just clean, careful lines, sturdy. Honest Demas was a tiny doll, wrapped in cloth stitched from the corner of an old dress. The head was only a rounded knot of fabric, but the arms were soft and the stitches were tight and even. For a moment, neither child spoke. The gifts were not unexpected, yet they felt impossible, as if the cold itself had stopped allowing such things. And then, just this once had made an exception. "Thank you," Emma whispered. Their father nodded once and turned back to the fire. That night, the children did not sleep right away. Samuel turned the little horse slowly in his hands. Emma traced the thread of her doll's stitched mouth with one finger again and again. They were careful not to touch too hard. Care was instinctive. Now, outside, the snow continued to fall. Inside, something like warmth settled into the corners of the room that the fire could not reach. Christmas morning arrived without fanfare. No bells inside the house. No voices raised in excitement. Just the slow sound of breath. The soft movement of blankets. The cold waiting patiently by the door. They ate their bread. They shared the apples. They drank the warm water that pretended to be tea. And yet, everything felt quietly transformed, because the children had learned, without being taught, that rarity itself gives shape to wonder. And so they wait for more gifts, not for brighter things, but for the simple return of moments like these. Moments that arrived rarely, without warning, and never stayed long. Outside, the snow began to melt just enough to reveal the road again. Thin, dark lines cutting through white, leading somewhere beyond the town, and beyond the quiet belief that this was all the world would ever be. But the children did not know that yet. They only knew the weight of small things in their hands, and the fragile promise that even in the coldest seasons, something gentle might still be waiting just beyond what they could see. The soft sound of boots in the snowy streets of early American towns. The warmth of bread was the first thing the children noticed when they came in from the cold. Before sound returned fully to their ears, before their fingers remembered feeling, before the red in their cheeks faded, there was always the smell, soft, steady, and alive. It came from the hearth, where a small loaf rested close to the coals, its crust deepening in quiet patience. In winter, scent traveled differently. It moved slowly, carefully, as if it too were afraid of the cold. But bread was brave. Bread entered every corner of the house in Simbilamblah's Thursday century America. Holiday meals were not built from abundance. They were shaped from what had survived the year. The dried apples hanging in cloth sacks near the ceiling had been cut in late summer. There. Juices darkening under open sun, each slice had been turned by hand, laid out with hope that rain would not come too soon. They were gathered again in early fall, shrunken and tough, but still sweet, holding the memory of warmer days hidden inside their skin. On Christmas Eve, the mother reached for those apples with careful fingers. She soaked them slowly, letting the water draw life back into them. Steam rose gently from the pot as they softened. The scent changed as minutes passed, first faint and hollow, then fuller, deeper, until the sweetness claimed the room. The children watched without speaking. They had learned early that watching was part of waiting. Flour was not wasted by accident in winter. Every cup carried the memory of the weight of the grain, the slow turning of the mill, the long journey from field to hand. When dough was made, it was made with restraint and quiet respect. Their mother worked it gently on the table, folding it back into itself again and again, the rhythm steady as breath. There was no music in the house at that hour, no carols yet, only the sound of dough and fire and small movements that mattered. Samuel stood near the door, rubbing warmth into his hands. Emma knelt by the hearth, her doll resting in her lap, its cloth face turned toward the flame. "When will it be ready?" she asked. "When it tells me," their mother said softly. The bread was not forced into readiness. It was allowed to become. In cold houses patience grew. There were few alternatives. Outside, the sky darkened into a deeper blue than the children usually saw. Snow clouds thickened at the horizon. The world beyond the door seemed farther away than it had in the morning. Winter pulled inward at everything inside. The father finished splitting the final piece of wood for the night. He stacked it close to the hearth. The fire leaned forward eagerly, taking what it could. The apples simmered. The bread rested. Holiday. Meals in those years were rarely marked by tables bending beneath weight. Instead, they were remembered for what they rescued from the cold. When the loaf was finally lifted from the hearth, it cracked softly as cooler air met hot crust. Steam escaped in quiet ribbons. The smell deepened again, richer now, more grounded. The children leaned closer without realizing it. Their mother cut slowly. There was no hurry. Each slice was decided, not assumed. The pieces were small, but they were shaped with intention, thick enough to hold warmth, thin enough to share. Butter was rare. Often it did not appear at all in winter. Sometimes there was only a spoon of rendered fat saved from earlier seasons. Tonight, there was none. And yet the bread needed nothing else. Warmth itself became flavor. The apples were poured into bowls, their liquid now dark and fragrant. The hardened edges had softened. The sweetness had returned, altered, slower, deeper. It was not the quick joy of summer fruit. It was the calm reward of survival. They ate in quiet, not because they were told to be silent, but because meals like this invited it. Every bite mattered too much to be spoken over. Samuel tore his bread slowly. Emma dipped her piece into the apples and watched the liquid soak upward, turning crust into softness. Their father ate, with his head bowed slightly. not in prayer, not in sadness, but in the familiar posture of a man who had carried the weight of weather and labor into the home, and now let it fall for a moment. The mother ate last, as she often did, watching the children more than her own bowl. It was not the largest Christmas meal the house would ever see, but it would be remembered long after larger ones faded, because hunger leaves marks in memory that fullness never does. Afterward, the bowls were rinsed and turned upside down on the table to dry. The children swept stray crumbs into their palms and ate them without embarrassment. Crumbs were not beneath notice. They were proof that something had been given. Outside, the snow began to fall again. Later in the evening, neighbors passed by the window, lantern light sliding across the glass, for just a moment before vanishing into white. Somewhere down the road, a door opened and closed. Voices drifted faintly. The town was awake in its own small way. Inside, the fire was fed once more. Emma pressed her doll closer to her chest. "I like when the apples smell like this," she said. "So do I," Samuel replied. Their mother nodded. "That means winter is still listening to us." The children did not fully understand the meaning of that, but they understood its comfort in many houses. The same meal took shape in many quiet forms. Dried berries where apples were scarce, cornbread where wheat had failed, salted meat where hunting had succeeded. Each table told a different version of the same story. That warmth was earned slowly and shared carefully. No one expected fullness. They expected endurance. And when warmth appeared, even briefly, it felt like a celebration that did not need announcement. Later, that night, after the children lay down beneath their wool blankets, the mother sat beside the cooling hearth. She mended a tear in Samuel's shirt by firelight, the needle catching the glow with each movement. Outside, the storm strengthened. Wind pressed snow into the sides of the house. The sound was steady, almost kind. In the dark room, the smell of bread still lingered. That scent did something to the walls, to the shadows, to the narrow spaces between rooms. It softened them. It made the house feel fuller than it truly was. In winters like these, smell became memory first. Long after the apples were gone, long after the last crumbs disappeared into hands and pockets, the children would still carry that warmth with them, not as flavor, not even as hunger, but as the quiet knowledge that food was not only what filled the, but yet was what told the heart the world had not turned away. Outside, snow coated the road in a deeper white. The path between houses blurred. Distance grew uncertain. Inside, warmth endured. And as the storm gathered its strength beyond the walls, the town itself seemed to draw inward, toward lantern light, toward hearth fire, toward voices that would soon rise again in softer ways, ways that would carry sound instead of silence. But that sound had not yet arrived. The soft sound of boots in the snowy streets of early American towns. The first sound the town made after the storm was the sound of boots. Not loud, not hurried, just a slow, steady pressing into soft snow, as if the earth itself were being gently tested to see if it still remembered the shape of footsteps. The storm had passed in the early hours before dawn. It left behind no drama, only a deep, unbroken quiet that stretched across rooftops, fence posts, and frozen windows. When morning arrived, it did so without color. The sky was pale, the light was thin. Smoke rose straight upward from chimneys. Unbent by wind, Samuel watched from the small front window as the first figure appeared at the far end of the street. It was Mr. Harlan, the baker, wrapped in his long wool coat, shoulders bent slightly forward, one hand tucked into his pocket, the other carrying a small sack. Each step pressed downward, then lifted, leaving behind a clean, oval mark in the snow. The sound reached the house a moment later, soft, hollow, almost thoughtful. Crunch. Pause. Crunch. Emma joined her brother at the glass. Her breath clouded the pain. "Why is it so quiet?" she asked. "Because the snow is listening," Samuel replied, repeating something his mother had once said. In early American towns, the streets were not built for speed. They were built for memory. Each boardwalk, each dirt path, each frozen rut carried the weight of years of passing boots. And in winter, when snow fell thick enough to erase those old impressions, the town briefly became young again. People did not rush into those mornings. They entered them slowly, as if the cold itself demanded permission before allowing movement. Soon, another figure emerged. Then, another. A woman carrying a lantern, though the sun was already rising. A man pushing a narrow cart with iron wheels that groaned beneath a crust of ice. A child trailing behind his father, stepping only where he saw the larger footprints, had already broken the path. Each movement added a sound to the growing morning, not noise, but presence. Inside the house, Samuel pulled on his coat. The wool was stiff from cold. It had dried too close to the hearth the night before. Emma struggled into her second sleeve, twisting her body to find it. "Where are you going?" their mother asked. "Just to the road," Samuel said. I want to see." She nodded. "Don't linger too long." The door opened with a dry, wooden ache. Cold poured into the house as if it had been waiting. The children stepped out together. The snow reached nearly to their ankles. It swallowed sound more. Then it carried it. Their boots sank deep, then lifted free in slow release. The street stretched ahead, wide, and strangely clean. They did not run. Running would have felt wrong. Every house along the road was awake in its own quiet way. Some doors opened only briefly, some not at all. From behind one window, Samuel glimpsed an old woman seated near her stove, hands folded in her lap, watching the morning without expectation. At the corner of the street, the general store stood silent. Its sign creaked faintly on its hinge with the smallest movement of air. No one had opened it yet. Mr. Harlan passed them as he returned from the far end of the road. He nodded to Samuel. "Cold settled deeper last night," he said. "Yes, sir," Samuel replied. "You'll hear it today," the man added. "Hear it." The children did not fully understand what he meant, but as they listened again, they noticed it the way the cold tightened every sound, the way wood spoke more sharply, the way iron rang slightly longer when touched. Even the snow itself seemed to speak when stepped upon at just the right angle. Further down the street, two men carried bundled firewood on their shoulders. They did not greet one another with words. They simply walked side by side, their boots forming a slow rhythm together. In summer, sound scattered icily, voices wandered, laughter traveled far. But in winter, sound stayed close to the ground. It rarely rose. It preferred to move forward in short distances, wrapped in layers of cold and patience. The children followed the edge of the road, careful not to disturb too much of the untouched white. Each new footprint felt like a small decision, At the far end of the street, near the bridge, a horse waited beside a sled. Steam rolled slowly from its nostrils. Its driver stood nearby, stamping his feet gently, not from impatience, but from habit. He tipped his hat to the children as they approached. "You heading anywhere special?" he asked. "No, sir," Samuel said, "just listening." The man smiled. "That's what winter's for." They turned back toward home as the town continued to awaken. More boots joined the street, some moving toward church, some toward the mill, some toward nothing in particular. The quiet grew fuller without growing loud, and with that fullness came something else, an awareness of distance. In warmer months, the spaces between houses felt shorter. Paths were clear, steps were quick. But in winter, every crossing became a small journey. The space between one doorway and the next stretched beneath layers of snow and silence. Emma leaned close to her brother. "Do you think everyone sounds different in winter?" He considered this. "I think winter makes us honest." She nodded, though she did not entirely understand. As they returned to their house, the smoke from their chimney curled differently now, bending slightly instead of rising straight. The air had begun to shift. Inside, their mother was sweeping near the hearth. The sound of bristles on the wooden floor was steady and soft. "People are waking up," Samuel said. "I know," she replied. "The town always tells us when it's ready." They hung their coats on wooden pegs near the door. Steam rose faintly from the wool as it warmed Dot outside. The sound of boots continued to weave through the street, stitching movement into the quiet fabric of the morning. These sounds carried news without words. They told who was well enough to walk, who was still home, who had strength, who did not. In small towns, footsteps were a language all their own. By mid-morning, the snow had stopped falling entirely. Sunlight began to soften the hard edge of white. Roofs glowed faintly. Icicles wept clear drops from their tips. The children returned to the window more than once. Each time, different figures passed. A young couple walking in silence, hands nearly touching but not quite. An older man pulling a sled empty now, planning to make it full later. A girl about Emma's age kicking at the snow, not to break it, but to learn how deeply it would yield. No one hurried. Hurrying was a summer habit. By afternoon, the road bore more tracks than open white. The day had written itself gently onto the ground. Inside, the house remained warm. Emma practiced small steps across the floor, mimicking the careful rhythm she had seen outside. Samuel laughed once, then stopped himself, listening again to how sound behaved in winter. Outside, the town continued its quiet movement through the day, every step a reminder that even in stillness, life carries on, and far beyond the reach of the small wooden houses, beyond the bridge, and over the frozen fields, deeper winter gathered itself again, patient, slow, and listening for the next sound that would rise to meet it. Church bells echoing gently through frozen morning air. The church bell did not rush the morning. It never did. It waited for the cold to settle completely, for the last quiet movements of night to loosen their grip on the town, and only then did it speak slowly, deliberately, as if testing whether the air was ready to carry sound. The first strike rolled outward like a deep breath. Not loud, not sharp, dot heavy, warm, steady dot from inside the house. Samuel felt it before he fully heard it, the low vibration passing gently through the floorboards, climbing the legs of the table, shivering faintly along the glass of the window panes. Emma paused with her hands in a bowl of water where their mother had sent her to rinse dried apple slices. "Did you feel that?" she whispered. "Yes," Samuel said softly. "It's the bell." Outside, the sound drifted through the frozen air and moved slowly across the town as if it were something visible, something that could be watched as it traveled. It curled around roof lines. It slipped through bare branches. It settled into the folds of untouched snow. The second bell came a breath later. Then the third. Each one carried the same calm weight. Each one landing in a different corner of the town, touching a different window, a different door, a different waking heart. For generations, the bell had been the town's voice when words were not enough. It did not command, it did not demand. It simply reminded. The sound reached the general store first, where Mr. Collins had just lifted the wooden crossbar from the door. He paused with the door half open and removed his hat, not from strict habit, but from something deeper than habit. The bell did not announce a service yet. It was too early for that. This ringing was only the morning's acknowledgement of itself. From the mill road, the bell traveled across the frozen stream where ice cracked softly beneath its own weight. A man paused mid-step, feeling the echo ripple beneath his boots as if the earth itself had answered back. In small houses scattered along the edges of town, families paused their movements. A woman stirring porridge slowed her hand. A man tightening a bootlace stopped pulling. A child sitting alone at the foot of a bed folded their hands, without fully knowing why. The cold carried everything further. Sound did not scatter in winter. It stayed whole. When the bell reached Samuel and Emma's street, it arrived with a strange gentleness full, yet softened by distance and snow. It moved through the narrow space between houses like a low wind that carried no chill. Their mother closed her eyes briefly when the fourth bell sounded. "Your grandmother used to say," she said quietly, "that winter bells don't just reach ears, they reach memory." Emma dried her hands on her apron. What kind of memory? The kind that stays even when people don't. Outside, the bell continued its measured speaking. Not one ring for each hour, not one ring for each call to prayer. Just a slow sequence meant only to remind the town that it was still held together by sound. By the time the seventh bell faded, movement had changed. People did not move faster, they moved with purpose. Coats were pulled tighter, scarves were wrapped with care. Doors opened with quieter hands. The streets did not fill quickly, they filled deliberately, as if no one wished to arrive too soon. Samuel and Emma stepped onto the porch again, drawn as much by the sound as by the way it altered. No air around them. The sky had lightened slightly, not with color, but with depth. The pale gray had grown softer. The sun was still hidden, but its presence could be felt in the way the cold eased its grip just enough to breathe. From the far end of the street, they could now see the church steeple faintly through the pale haze. Its narrow shape rose above the rooftops with quiet certainty. The bell hung unseen within it, doing its work without showing its face. Neighbors emerged one by one. Some walked toward the church. Some simply stood on their porches and listened. Others turned back inside after a moment, as if the sound alone had been enough to carry their thoughts where they needed to go. An old man named Thomas walked slowly past the children, his cane pressing soft holes into the snow beside his boots. He tipped his hat slightly as the final echo faded. "She still sounds strong," he said. Emma looked up at him. The bell, he smiled. And the town. Down the road, a woman wrapped in a dark shawl waited for her husband at the corner. When he reached her, they did not speak at first. They stood side by side, listening to the bell's last breath float away into the distance. Only when the quiet returned did they begin to walk together. Inside the church, unseen by those outside, the rope still trembled faintly in the hands of the man who had rung it. He stood alone in the tower, feeling the vibration fade through his palms. He always waited until the final echo disappeared before letting go. To release the rope too early felt like interrupting a thought. Below, the wooden pews remained mostly empty for now. Light filtered through the frosted windows in pale sheets that settled softly on the floor. Dust moved within that light like slow, uncertain snow. The building was not large. It did not need to be. It had been built to gather, not to impress. Outside, the street slowly reassembled itself after the bell's passing. Footsteps returned. Doors opened again. Muted voices spoke low, as if unwilling to tear the quiet that had settled so carefully over the morning. Samuel felt something heavy in his chest, not sadness, not joy, but something steady and deep that did not yet have a name. Why does it always feel like that when the bells ring? Emma asked. He searched for words, then shrugged. Because everything is listening at the same time. They stood there a while longer, letting the cold sink into their boots without complaint. Across the town, the bell's echo moved into places where sound seldom reached into the narrow gaps between buildings, beneath low eaves, across frozen fields where no one walked at all. Even there, it left a trace, as if the land itself had paused to hear its own reflection. In a small farmhouse beyond the bridge, a woman feeding chickens lifted her head when the sound arrived faintly across the open snow. She stood still for a moment, grain forgotten in her hand, and closed her eyes as if the bell had spoken directly to her. In another house, nearer the river, a newborn stirred gently at the vibration in the floorboards. The mother did not wake fully, but her arm curled instinctively around the small body. Not every bell reached every ear, but every bell reached something back in the town. The first family reached the church doors. They pushed them open slowly. The hinges sang softly. Inside, the air held a different cold odor, steadier, less sharp than the air outside. The smell of wood and faint wax lingered from earlier evenings. The warmth of last night's candles still lived faintly in the walls as more people arrived. They did not fill the space with noise. They filled it with presence. Coats brushed gently against pews. Boots touched bare floor. Breaths settled into quiet rhythm. Outside, snow began to drift, again not fall, just drift lightly, as if the sky were rearranging itself rather than adding anything new. Samuel and Emma did not follow the others inside just yet. They remained on the road, watching as the last of the bell's invisible path finished tracing itself across the town. The sound was gone now, but something it left behind lingered. The streets no longer felt empty. They felt held. And as the doors of the church closed softly behind the gathering families, the town returned to its slower movements, changed not by louder sound, but by the gentle certainty that something steady still watched over the hours of winter. Yet even as that calm took root, deeper within the town, another tradition waited quietly for its turn to emerge, one shaped not by bells or stone walls, but by voices, breath, and hands joined together in song. The tradition of Hansun carols before music was recorded. The first carol of the season did not begin with a full voice. It began with a breath. A thin, uncertain line of sound rose from inside one of the houses near the church, slipped through a barely opened door, and touched the frozen morning as lightly as falling ash. It was not yet a song. It was only the intention of one. Inside that house, a woman stood near the hearth, with her hands folded at her waist. The fire had been fed only moments earlier. The room still carried the quiet shape of cold, though warmth had begun to push gently outward from the coals. She had not planned to sing aloud. The sound had escaped her without asking. The melody was old, older than the town, older than the church bell, older than words written neatly. On paper, it was the kind of song remembered not by reading, but by hearing it once and carrying it for life. Outside, the sound moved carefully through the air, as if unsure whether it was welcome. It reached the narrow space between two houses, and paused there, trembling faintly. The cold shaped it, thinned it, stretched it farther than the singer could ever have imagined. Another window opened a fraction of an inch down the street. A second voice, joined not in perfect time, not in matching pitch, but in shared understanding. The song took a single step forward. Inside Samuel and Emma's house. The sound arrived as if someone had knocked gently on the glass with a fingertip made of breath. Emma lifted her head. Samuel stilled his movements without meaning to. "Is that singing?" she whispered. Their mother listened closely. "Yes," she said, "the carols are waking up." In the years before recorded music, before polished instruments filled rooms at the turn of a handle, sound belonged only to those who made it. Every note required a body. Every melody needed lungs and memory and courage enough to let it be imperfect. No one waited for permission to begin. Songs emerged when the air felt ready. Down the street, an old man stepped onto his porch as the melody reached him. He leaned both hands on the railing and closed his eyes. The words met him out of order. The tune wavered slightly in places. That did not matter. It was enough that it lived. He added his voice not loudly, not even confidently, but with steadiness. His tone carried the weight of time rather than strength. 3 voices, now, then 4. None of them stood close together. None of them stood apart. They were stitched into the same invisible thread of sound. In small towns, winter voices traveled differently than summer ones. The cold tightened them, focused them. A song in winter did not drift, it moved with intention, like a traveler, crossing open land with purpose. Samuel stepped closer to the window. "They're not all in one place," he said. "No," his mother replied. "They don't have to be." Outside, a woman carrying a basket paused mid-step as the song brushed past her. She turned slightly toward the nearest house, where a voice was rising from an open doorway. Without setting down her basket, without fully deciding, she joined in on the distant harmony. Her voice entered softly, like someone slipping into a room near the back wall. The melody swelled, not with volume, but with depth. Each new voice added space rather than noise. This was how carols lived, before they were captured by machines, passed from mouth to mouth, shaped by breath, carried by cold. Inside the church, the door was still closed. No organ waited. No choir stood ready. The song did not need those things. It needed only people. Samuel and Emma stepped onto the porch again, without coats, this time, drawn by the warmth of sound more than the fear of cold. Their breath rose quickly in pale clouds. The voices were not perfect. Some entered too early. Some lingered too long, some trembled, but none were wrong. Imperfection was the proof that the sound was alive. A man near the bridge joined in with a voice so low it seemed to come from the river itself. Farther up the hill, another voice floated down, higher and thinner, catching against the roof lines before settling into the street. Not everyone sang. Many simply listened. Listening was a form of singing, too, in those years. Because to listen meant to hold the sound steady as it passed through you. Emma looked down at her hands, then back at the street. Do they all know the same song? Yes, her mother said, even if they learned it differently. The children did not yet understand how this could be true. But they would. In one house, a mother sang while braiding her daughter's hair. The girl fidgeted at first, then stilled as the melody shaped itself around her. The braid held not only hair, but sound within its quiet order. In another house, a man sang alone beside a table where an empty chair rested. He did not sing loudly. He did not sing sadly. He sang as one might speak to someone who is not gone, only waiting. The carol stretched further now. No single singer could hear the whole of it. That was part of its strength. It existed in pieces, in echoes, in overlapping breaths. Outside the town's edge, the song crossed open snowfields and thinned into something nearly invisible. Even there, it left a faint warmth along the air, like a memory resting where a voice had been. Samuel felt something stir in him that he could not name. Why does it feel like the sound is walking? He asked. Because it is, his mother said. Emma watched her breath move as she tried to match her own quiet humming to the distant melody. At first, her voice caught in her throat. Then it found its way. It was barely audible, but it was real. Inside the church at last, the door opened. Those who had gathered there heard the carol already, waiting for them in the air before their own voices had a chance to begin. For a moment, they stood uncertainly in the doorway, as if stepping into a river already flowing. Then one voice inside took hold of the tune. Another followed. The sound deepened as it entered the wooden walls. The church did not create the carol. It received it, the building answered, with echoes that softened the edges and folded the sound back upon itself. The floorboards held the vibration. The pews carried it along their length. Outside, those who had not entered the church continued to sing from where they streets, doorways, and snow-covered yards. For a little while, inside and outside were part of the same room. In houses where no one sang, the carol still passed through. It filtered through cracks in walls, through loose window panes, through the spaces beneath doors. Sound found a way. The townspeople did not mark the length of the song. They did not know how many verses were. Sunga. They did not count. The song ended not with a clear finish, but with a gradual thinning, voices falling away one by one as breath ran out, as duty called, as hands needed to move again. The last voice lingered near the far end of the street, hesitant to stop. When silence returned, it did not feel empty, it felt shipped. Emma exhaled slowly. I don't want it to disappear. Her mother crouched beside her. It never does, she said. It only changes form. Samuel looked down the street again. People were moving once more. Baskets lifted, doors closed, boots returned to their steady rhythm. The town continued, but something now traveled. With it, not a sound, a memory of sound. Inside the church, the last echo faded from the rafters. The man who had opened the door earlier stood near the back, his hands resting on the wood of the pew. He did not rush forward. He listened even after there was nothing left to hear. Outside, the winter tightened its hold again. Clouds gathered slowly beyond the hill. The air prepared itself for more snow. The carols had softened the morning, but they had not changed the season. And yet, as Samuel and Emma stepped back inside their house, shaking cold from their hands, the warmth felt different now. Not hotter, not closer, as if sound itself had remained behind. Their mother returned to her work quietly. The fire shifted. The kettle whispered. The day continued to unfold its slow winter shape. But far beneath all of it, beneath the movements and the silence, beneath the labor and the waiting, something unseen had begun to move through the town, something that would soon appear again in another form, carried not by breath this time, but by the deep hush of cold rooms, heavy blankets, and the long waiting of December nights. Cold bedrooms and heavy blankets that held families close. Night arrived without ceremony. There was no sudden darkness, no sharp edge between day and evening, only the slow withdrawal of light from the corners of the room. The fire lowered its voice. Shadows grew longer before they grew deeper. Outside, the last movements of the town softened into stillness, as if every house had agreed, without speaking, to rest at the same moment. Inside, Amelia folded the final blanket. It was thick with years patched in two places, darkened at the edges, softened by the weight of many winters. She shook it once, before lifting it over her arm. A quiet cloud of cold cloth scent rose and faded. Time, she said gently. Samuel had already begun to yawn. Emma resisted sleep, the way children always did, with denial, disguised as sudden interest in nothing at all. Their bedroom waited at the back of the house. It was the coldest room. No fire reached it directly. No lingering heat stayed there long. The cold crept into that space first and left it last, as if it had claimed it as its own. The bed stood against the far wall beneath, a narrow window where frost had begun to sketch pale leaves against the glass. The mattress was thin. The frame creaked softly under even the lightest shift of weight. Yet each winter night, that bed became something more than wood and cloth. It became a small shared island of warmth in an otherwise frozen world. Samuel climbed in first, pulling his knees to his chest for a moment before stretching out again. Emma followed, her feet cold even through her wool socks. I can't feel my toes, she whispered dramatically. That means they're still yours, Samuel replied. Amelia smiled as she drew the first blanket up over them. Its weight settled slowly, deliberately pressing the air away, trapping warmth before it could escape. Another blanket followed, and then another, layer by layer, until the children disappeared beneath a small, mountainous rise of cloth and wool. Cold bedrooms in the 19th century were not quiet in the way warm ones are. They spoke in small sounds. The distant groan of wood contracting under frost. The faint whisper of wind finding its way through unsealed boards. The subtle, constant shifting of breath beneath blankets. Emma turned onto her side so she faced Samuel. Their foreheads nearly touched beneath the rising and falling fabric. "Do you think it gets this cold everywhere?" she asked. "Probably," he said, "except near the ocean." She considered this. Do people near the ocean still need blankets? Everybody needs blankets. She seemed satisfied. Across the hall, their parents' room held its own smaller island of warmth. Another bed, another set of blankets, another quiet resistance against the cold that pressed at the walls. The fire in the main room had been banked for the night. It would smolder until morning if it was kind. If it was not, it would fade into ash before dawn. The children listened to the house settle. There was a sound that always came just before sleep, the frame adjusting, the beams stretching against one another, the walls answering the shift in temperature with low, patient creaks. It was not the sound of danger. It was the sound of endurance. Winter did not tear the house apart. It tested it slowly. Emma tucked her feet beneath Samuel's legs without asking. He did not protest. This was the arrangement many nights found for them. Warmth traveled from one body to another without complaint. Their breath formed a shared rhythm under the covers. In warmer seasons, sleep arrived easily. In winter, it arrived with negotiation. The body argued with the cold before surrendering. Emma whispered, "Tell me something." Samuel paused, searching for something that would not wake her too much. About what? About before. He chose carefully. About when the river wasn't frozen yet. She nodded. "It moved fast," he said, "and loud. You could hear it from the field. Father said it carried pieces of the mountain with it sometimes. Not big ones, just bits of stone that traveled so far. They forgot where they came from." Emma imagined this quietly. "Do they miss the mountain?" "Maybe," he said. "But maybe they like the journey more." Her breathing slowed as the story worked its way into her dot. In houses all across the town, similar scenes unfolded. Blankets were lifted. Bodies shifted. Children pressed closer to parents. Siblings gathered warmth by shared accident in some rooms. 3 slept together. In others, 4. Beds were not always divided by age. They were divided by heat. Cold bedrooms were where families learned closeness without language. At the far edge of town, a widower lay beneath a heavy quilt that had once covered 2. He folded one side over as though someone were still there. The weight comforted him, even in absence. In another house, a young mother slept beside her newborn. Their breaths mismatched in tempo, yet bound beneath the same woven cover. Blankets, in those years, were not decoration. They were survival shaped into fabric. Every stitch meant that someone had taken the time to press needle through resistance again and again. Every patch meant that something was not discarded simply because it was worn. Warmth was not bought. It was built. Emma stirred once more as a colder draft crept along the floorboards. The chill seemed to rise from the earth itself, reaching upward with careful fingers. Samuel shifted higher beneath the covers, pulling Emma closer with him without waking. Fully. Their foreheads touched again. Shared warmth made no demands. It simply existed. The mother lay awake longer than the rest. She listened for sounds that meant safety. The steady breathing down the hall, the faint tick of cooling metal near the hearth, the distant wind that never quite found its way. Inside, she held her own blanket near her chin and let her thoughts move slowly. Winter asked little from sleeping baddies, only that they stay still enough for warmth to gather. Outside, the snow tightened its grip on the town. Roofs creaked, trees bent under new weight. The road erased the faint impressions left by the day. Footsteps, a carol from earlier, did not return. But its memory lingered in the way breath rose and fell through wool. In the darkness of the children's room, frost thickened on the window until the outside world disappeared completely. Inside, the bed became the entire known world. Emma dreamed of apples thawing in warm water. Samuel dreamed of the river before ice. Neither knew how long the night would last, but neither felt alone within it. The cold pressed against the house as it always did, testing seams, tracing corners, searching for weakness. The blankets resisted quietly, not with strength, with togetherness. And beneath their weight, beneath layers of wool and memory and shared breath, the family slept not deeply, not without movement, but held inside the only warmth winter could not reach directly. The cold would return in the morning, it always did. But for now, beneath the slow shelter of heavy cloth and shared heat, the night remained held back just far enough to allow sleep to enter softly, carefully, just for a while. Fireplaces that never truly went out during December nights. The fire never truly went out, even when its flame sank low, even when its voice softened into near silence, even when the house slept and the windows turned into pale mirrors of frost. The hearth still held a quiet pulse of red beneath the ash. It was not alive in the way flames are alive, but it was not dead either. It rested, waiting. Amelia rose once during the night, not fully awake, not fully asleep. The cold called her from beneath the blankets not as a shock, but as a memory, an understanding learned over many winters that fires must be listened to, even in dreams. She slipped from the bed carefully, so as not to wake her husband. Her bare feet met the floor in brief protest. The cold bit gently but firmly. She wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and moved through the dark. The house was different at this hour. It did not belong to daylight or to evening. It belonged to breath and shadow and the faint sounds that did not exist when people were fully awake. The boards whispered beneath her steps. The walls held their chill quietly. Somewhere in the distance, a branch tapped once against the outer siding and fell still again at the hearth. The fire had dimmed to a field of coals. Their glow was faint but steady, like stars pressed into the earth. She knelt and stirred them with the poker. A deeper red answered her movement, slow and patient. She placed 2 narrow pieces of wood into the cradle of heat, not to reignite the fire in full voice, but to feed it just enough to last until dawn. The logs caught quietly, no flare, no crack, only the gradual return of warmth. In many houses throughout the town, similar movements unfolded without witness. A man rose from a chair where he had been sleeping, stirred his coals, returned to half sleep again. A mother adjusted the blanket beside the hearth, where her child lay close enough to feel the faint breath of heat. An elderly woman who slept closest to the fire, for fear of the night, let the wood settle before closing her eyes again. In December, fireplaces were not for comfort alone. They were the heart's second pulse if the fire failed. The night did not forgive it easily. Cold moved quickly into unguarded spaces. It thickened in corners. It crept beneath doors. It laid slow, invisible claim to fingers and toes that reached for warmth too late. So the fire was not allowed to rest deeply, only lightly. Samuel stirred in his sleep as the warmth shifted through the house. Emma pressed closer without waking. The blankets responded to the change in temperature before their bodies did. Wool expanded softly. Breath deepened. Amelia watched the fire for another moment. It shaped the room. Beyond itself, objects did not exist independently of it at night. The table gained its outline only from the glow. The chair revealed its arms one at a time depending on where the red light leaned. The kettle reflected a dim, curved echo of flame as if holding a second fire inside itself. She turned back toward the bed, and behind her, the fireplace continued its quiet work. Fireplaces in those years were not decorative centers. They were vows made of brick and iron. They had been laid stone by hands that understood winter long before the walls rose around them. The hearth was always the first true thing built inside a home. Everything else arranged itself around that promise of heat. Wood was measured, not by beauty but by time. Each log represented minutes of survival. Each split piece of kindling carried the memory of effort from an earlier hour. The crack of axe into grain still lived somewhere inside the fuel, even after it burned. Some nights, when the cold sharpened beyond its usual edge, the fire demanded more frequent attention. It whispered its need through sinking light. Those were the nights people took turns, sleeping, one eye open, one ear trained to the hush that meant danger. Children did not know these worries by name, but they knew their shapes. They knew that fire was watched like a living thing. They knew that fathers rose in the night with quiet urgency. They knew that mornings, sometimes, began with relief disguised as routine. There were stories in the town of winters when fire had failed. They were not told often, but everyone remembered at least one. A family whose chimney froze too narrow for smoke to rise properly, forcing the fire to choke itself. A roof that caught unexpectedly, turning warmth into crisis. A wind so sharp it tore heat from rooms faster than wood could replace it. Those were remembered not with drama but with caution. Fire was respected because loss had taught that lesson deeply. At the edge of the hearth, Amelia's shadow lingered for a moment after she left. Then it faded back into the general hush of the room. The fire settled again. The logs leaned into one. Another ash shifted slightly as heat worked its way outward through blackened grain. Outside, the trees creaked beneath the tightening cold. Snow changed shape as temperature shifted. The town did not sleep deeply. It entered only a light, careful rest, aware that winter always tested those who forgot its presence. Later in the night, Samuel dreamed of fire not as flame, but as movement. He dreamed of a line of warmth moving forward through darkness like a quiet river of light. It did not burn. It did not harm. It simply traveled. And wherever it passed, the dark eased back slightly. Emma dreamed of sitting beside the hearth while apples bubbled in a pot. She was small again in the dream. Her feet never quite reached the floor, but the heat always found her. Fire filled dreams in strange ways. It became safety. It became hunger. It became memory. Across the town, similar dreams took shape without meeting one another. All answered the same hidden question. Will warmth still be here when morning comes? Before dawn, the fire was fed once more. This time, it was the father who moved. He did not light a lamp. He did not need one. The hearth gave enough direction. He knew the layout of the room without sight. Winter had taught him to move by memory. He added, wood that listened, until he heard the small settling sound that meant the fire had accepted it. Then he returned to bed. The fire did not thank him. It simply continued. Fireplaces were not grateful. They were necessary. As the deepest part of the night passed, the world seemed to pause at its coldest breath. Frost tightened. Air stilled. Even distant sounds disappeared as if swallowed by temperature inside the hearth. Red still lived beneath gray, and that was enough. Morning would come differently because of it. The children would wake to air that did not sting as sharply. Hands would move again without complete numbness. The house would remember itself as more than shelter. It would remember itself as warm. But before that, before light, before movement, before the slow build of another winter day, the fire held the final watch alone. It did not sleep. It waited, and far beyond the reach of brick and iron, beyond the frozen fields and sleeping roads, winter gathered once more in its vast, passion-moving, unfeeling, and endless. The smallest surviving flame continued to challenge it from within quiet walls, not with power, not with defiance, but with steadiness just enough to last. Simple handmade toys, carved from wood and scraps of cloth. Morning entered the house quietly, as if unsure of its welcome. The cold remained first. It always did. Light arrived only after the chill had already taken its place in every corner. On every surface, the frost still clung to the inside edge of the window, its delicate patterns thinning slowly as pale winter sun pressed against the glass from the outside. Emma woke before Samuel. She always did. Her eyes opened to a dull gray brightness that made the room feel neither night nor day. The blankets were heavy over her chest, warm where Samuel's shoulder pressed against her back, cooler where the fabric lifted slightly with each breath. For a long moment, she did not move. She simply listened. The house had its own morning sound. Not the open clatter of daytime, not the deep hush of night, but something in between. The faint tick of the hearth settling, the soft shift of wood as the house adjusted to the changing temperature, a distant cough from the far room where her father was already awake. Emma slipped one hand from beneath the blankets. The air caught her fingers. Instantly, she drew them back again and smiled to herself. Today was not a day to rush. Samuel stirred as she shifted, his breathing changing shape as he drifted closer to waking. A few moments later, his eyes opened. "You're thinking too loud again," he murmured. Emma whispered, "I wasn't thinking out loud at all." "You were thinking with your shoulders," he said, tugging the blanket higher between them. They lay there for another moment, watching the frost thin along the window until the sound of their mother's footsteps passed softly down the hall. Not hurried, not heavy, the sound of a day being allowed to begin slowly And then, the sound that always meant winter mornings truly began. Wood against wood, the soft, steady rhythm of carving. It came from the small work table near the hearth. Emma's eyes widened. "He's already started," she whispered. Samuel smiled without opening his eyes fully. "He said he would." The children waited only a moment longer before slipping from the bed. Their feet met the floor with practiced hesitation, avoiding the coldest spots along the boards. They pulled on sweaters that still held a faint memory of yesterday's warmth. Wool scratched lightly at their wrists and necks. Emma tied her long hair back with a strip of faded cloth, while Samuel reached for his socks, one of which had developed a permanent thin place at the heel. They moved down the narrow hallway, without running but not quite walking either. At the hearth, their father sat on the low bench beside the table. The fire had been fed anew. Its glow pushed warmth outward in uneven waves. Shadows gathered in soft pools along the walls. Light flickered across his hands as they worked steadily, patiently. On the table before him lay small shapes, some already familiar, others not yet fully formed. A tiny horse with no legs, yet attached. The rough body of a doll waiting for arms. A boat with one side still unfinished. Scraps of cloth lay folded beside these wooden beginnings. Threads waited, coiled like quiet promises. Emma approached first. "What are you making now?" she asked. He did not look up at once. He never did until the cut was finished. The blade moved once more through the wood, shaving away a thin, curled ribbon that fell softly near his foot. "A traveler," he said finally. Samuel leaned in. "For who?" "For whoever needs to go somewhere later." Emma frowned at the small, unfinished shape. "It doesn't have a face." "Not yet," he replied. "Faces are our last." They decide too much too early. The children settled on the floor near the warmth, legs folded, hands tucked beneath their knees. They had learned long ago not to reach for the pieces until invited. Toys made this way did not hurry. They arrived only when they were finished being themselves. The wood he used was never new. It came from broken chairs, from fallen branches dried beside the shed, from crates once used to carry flour or apples. Nothing that became a toy had been born solely for play. Everything had lived another life first. He selected the pieces carefully. Harder wood for animals, lighter grain for dolls, thin, flexible slats for wheels and oars. Every toy carried the memory of what it had once been, and once carved, once shaped and smoothed by careful hands. It entered the second life quietly without celebration. Emma watched the traveler take form beneath the knife. The head rounded, the shoulders softened, the body lengthened slightly, as if learning to stand. Shavings gathered on the floor like pale snow. Samuel shifted closer to the table. "Will it have a coat?" he asked. "If it expects winter," their father said. Emma nodded seriously. All travelers should expect winter. From the cloth pile beside the table. Their mother had already sorted colors. There was no fabric, chosen for beauty alone. Red came from worn sleeves. Blue from a patch cut out of an old apron. Brown from a coat that had grown too small for its owner years before. Even the smallest toy carried pieces of someone else's story, stitched into its shape. Later in the morning, the town would wake fully. Smoke would begin to rise in irregular lines from chimneys. Boots would strike frozen ground. Voices would carry farther than they did in summer. But inside this small space, near the hearth, time gathered itself more slowly. Emma reached for a doll that sat finished near the table's far edge. It had no stitched face, yet only the smooth suggestion of a head, and the soft weight of cloth's body beneath her fingers. "Is this one for me?" she asked. Their father glanced at it. "If you decide it is." She held the doll carefully. "I think she belonged somewhere else first." "Most things do," he said. Samuel lifted the tiny unfinished horse. It had no legs yet, only a rounded body and a suggestion of a neck. "Will it be fast?" he asked. "That depends on who rides it," his father replied. Simple, handmade toys did not instruct children how to imagine. They waited to be assigned. There were no painted eyes to suggest emotion, no fixed mouths to demand a story. Each toy arrived as a beginning rather than a conclusion by mid. The traveler had gained their coat. The fabric was deep green, faded almost too gray. The stitches were uneven in the quiet way that meant they had been done carefully rather than quickly. A tiny cord made of twisted thread cinched the coat at the waist. Emma held the finished figure in both hands. "Where are they going?" she asked. Their father finally set the knife aside. "That depends on what the cold has not taken yet." She thought about this. "Maybe they're going to the river, even if it's frozen." Samuel added, "Or over the hill where the sun comes up first." The traveler did not argue. It accepted its fate in silence. As morning widened, Amelia moved about the house more fully now. The kettle sang softly. The smell of warming bread mixed with wood smoke. The windows brightened. Emma gathered the toys from the table with permission and carried them to the corner near the hearth. She set the traveler beside the doll. The unfinished horse waited nearby, like something being considered. Samuel fetched a scrap of cloth and folded it into a blanket for the doll. "She need this," he said. "It's still winter." Emma placed the blanket over the doll carefully, mirroring the way her mother had covered them the night before. In this way, toys learned warmth from the very beginning. As the hours moved forward, neighbors would come and go. Sometimes they brought nothing. Sometimes they brought broken things that hoped for a second life. A missing wheel, a cracked wooden spoon that would become a limb, a torn sleeve that might become a scarf. Handmade toys were never private work. They belonged, in some quiet way, to the whole town. Each piece of wood that passed through these hands carried a history heavier than its size, and each toy that left the house did so carrying something new that could not be measured in grain or thread. By midday, the traveler was joined by small companions. A bird carved from a branch thin enough to bend a tiny sled made from 2 matchstick runners and a scrap of leather. The unfinished horse began to feel left behind. Samuel noticed. "When will it be done?" he asked. "When it knows how to stand," their father replied. He tested the balance quietly. Not all toys wished to stand at once. Some needed patience. Outside, wind brushed the bare branches lightly. Snow shifted in faint, dry whispers along the road. Inside, the toys gathered. Emma lined them along the hearth in a careful curve, as though they were watching the fire together. The traveler stood at the center. The doll lay resting beneath her cloth. blanket. The bird faced the light. Samuel set the sled slightly to one side as if awaiting motion, and the horse waited at the back of the line, unfinished, unsteady, full of promise it did not yet know how to carry. Their mother paused beside them. "They look like they're waiting for something," she said. "They are," Emma replied. "They're waiting for later." Later was where all toys truly lived. Not in the moment of making dot. Not in the moment of giving. But in the quiet space where imagination learned to breathe through them. Dot afternoon would come, evening would follow, and night would once again return without ceremony. But for now, the small wooden figures near the hearth held their places in the advancing light, unaware that their stories had only just begun, like the children themselves, for the long winter to continue teaching them how to endure. Why silence was part of Christmas more than celebration. Christmas did not arrive with noise that year. It did not announce itself with laughter spilling through doors, nor with bells answering one another from one end of the town to the other. There were no sudden crowds in the narrow streets, no rush of voices layered over voices. Instead, Christmas entered the town the same way snow did, persistently, without needing permission. Morning came pale and still. The sky carried no color strong enough to be called blue. It hovered somewhere between silver and gray, as if the day itself were unsure how loudly it was allowed to exist. Smoke rose from chimneys in thin, careful lines. Even the wind seemed to move with restraint. Inside the house, the family woke without the excitement that stories would one day attach to the holiday. There were no shouts, no sudden, racing footsteps. Only the soft rearranging of blankets, the sound of a kettle set gently onto the hearth, and the faint creak of the floor as Amelia crossed the room. Emma rubbed her eyes and sat up slowly. "Is it Christmas now?" she asked, not with surprise, but with quiet confirmation. Her mother nodded. "It is." Samuel looked toward the window. "It looks the same. That's how you know it's real," their father said without looking up from where he was fastening his boots in their town. Christmas did not stand apart from winter. It settled within it. The cold did not pause for celebration. Hunger did not wait for songs. The fire still demanded wood. Water still froze in bouquets, left unwatched. The world did not soften its rules simply because the calendar had turned to a sacred day. And so people learned another language for Christmas. They learned silence. Breakfast was eaten quietly, not solemnly, just without excess. There was bread warmed by the fire, a little butter saved for the day, apples sliced thin so that they might seem more than they were. No one spoke very much while they ate. There was no need to. The shared act itself carried enough meaning. Outside, neighbors passed in ones or twos. They nodded. Sometimes they touched their fingers briefly to a brow or chest in small gestures learned long ago. Words were not required for acknowledgement. The church bell did not ring at dawn. It would ring once later when the light was strongest. Until then, the town remained held in its quiet agreement. Emma noticed it most when she stepped outside. The cold pressed at her instantly, sharp, but not cruel. Snow lay evenly across the road, as if carefully laid there by unseen hands. Her breath lifted in pale clouds that vanished almost as soon as they formed. She listened. No carts rolled, no doors banged, no distant shouts crossed the fields. Even the animals seemed to move more slowly. "Why is it so quiet?" she asked. Samuel answered without looking at her. "Because everybody's listening." "To what?" He shrugged. "To the day. I think." Inside the house, the toys waited exactly where they had been left, near the hearth. The traveler stood at the center. The doll rested beneath her cloth blanket. The bird faced the light. The unfinished horse still waited at the back of the line. Emma lifted the traveler gently. "Are they listening to?" she asked. "To what?" her father said. "To Christmas," she replied. He smiled at that, but said nothing. In years to come, Christmas would grow louder. It would gather decorations, colors, music, bright chaos. But in this town, in this winter, it belonged more to absence than abundance. Silence was not emptiness. It was space. Space for remembering. For noticing. For holding what little remained without calling attention to its smallness. By people began to move toward the church. Not in groups, not with excitement. In steady, measured lines. Families walked side by side. Their footsteps compressed the snow gently, leaving paths that crossed without urgency. Some carried candles wrapped in cloth to protect the flame. Others carried nothing at all. Inside the church, the light was dim. Windows admitted only a softened version of the pale morning. The air held the scent of cold wool, old wood, and faint traces of smoke that never fully left winter buildings. People took their places quietly. No one hurried to sit. No one searched for the front. This was not a gathering for display. It was a gathering for presence. The bell rang only once. Its sound traveled outward across the frozen town and then fell away, leaving behind the deeper hush that followed a single, unshared note. There was no choir, no instruments, only one voice, aged and careful, reading words that most of the people already knew by heart. The voice did not rise. It did not attempt to stir what was already awake. The story of the child in the cold was spoken almost as a memory rather than a proclamation. People listened without moving. Babies did not cry. Older children did not fidget. Even the restless seemed to settle simply because the air required it. Silence became a shared breathing. Emma felt it pressed gently against her ears, not uncomfortable, but wide and complete. It felt like standing at the edge of a frozen lake and realizing the ice beneath your feet went farther than you could see. When the reading ended, there was no immediate sound, no cue for response. People remained still as if waiting for the quiet itself to finish speaking. Then, slowly, carefully, the meeting dissolved. Not with applause, not with chatter, with the simple sound of coats being lifted, boots touching stone, the faintest of coughs reclaimed by the cold outside. The town returned to its holding patterns. Some families visited one another briefly. They did not arrive with arms full. Sometimes they brought a single apple, a loaf broken in half, a knitted square intended to be joined later with others into a quilt. Gifts were not surprised into being. They were recognized. Emma and Samuel carried the toys with them when they visited the widower at the edge of town. He did not bend Zali anymore. His hands trembled slightly when he reached for things. Emma placed the doll in his lap without explanation. He studied it for a long time. "She'll be warm," Emma said. He nodded. "She already is." Samuel set the bird on the small table near the window. "It can watch," he said. The man liked that the tray was given to a child whose coat was too thin. The unfinished horse was kept back. It was for later, back in their own house. The afternoon settled in with a different quality than other days. No one worked in the usual way, but no one truly rested either. Clothes were mended slowly. Wood was stacked with attention. Water was fetched and counted. Everything that might fail in a harsher future was quietly strengthened in the present. Emma asked, "If it's Christmas, why aren't we celebrating?" Her mother folded cloth with careful hands. "We are," she said, "just not loudly." Samuel asked, "Why?" Their father considered before answering. "Because noise belongs to moments that are certain," he said. "Silence belongs to moments that are carried." Emma did not fully understand this, but she felt the truth of it in the way the day moved, in the way people touched one another's shoulders, briefly without speaking, in the way the fire's cracking seemed almost too loud in the late afternoon, in the way even the wind returned, more gently than usual. As the light faded, candles were lit. Again, not many. Just enough. The toys were returned to their places near the hearth. The unfinished horse waited still. Dinner was simple. No one apologized for it. Afterward, they sat together, without immediate purpose. No songs were sung, no stories were demanded. Each person carried their own thoughts and allowed the others the same uninterrupted space. Outside, the stars appeared gradually, not in brilliance, but in quiet persistence. Each small point of light claimed its place without argument. Emma leaned her head against her mother's arm. "Will Christmas be louder next year?" she asked. Her mother answered honestly, "It might be." "Will it be quieter?" "It might be that, too." Emma nodded. Silence, she was learning, did not mean the absence of something. It meant the presence of something not yet described. The fire shifted. The toys held their places. The town rested in its shared restraint, and Christmas, unseen but unmistakable, moved through them all, not in brightness, not in clamor, but in the vast and careful space between one heartbeat and the next, where warmth waited without asking to be announced, unfinished, unresolved, still moving like the season itself. Families writing letters instead of sending cards. Winter afternoons had a certain stillness that invited reflection. Outside, the snow soft the world, transforming roads into gentle slopes of white and muffling every sound that might otherwise disturb the day. Inside, the house smelled faintly of wood smoke, drying apples, and the occasional hint of cinnamon from a small pot that simmered quietly on the back of the stove. Amelia sat at the worn table. Quill, in hand ink, filled the small glass well, dark and still. The quill's tip hovered above the paper, poised like a bird about to touch down. She dipped it gently, allowing the thin black line to stretch across the page, slowly shaping letters that carried not just words, but thought, care, and intention. Samuel and Emma were beside her. not because they were particularly interested in writing themselves, but because there was a quiet magic in watching letters form a magic, born of the deliberate effort it took to communicate over distance when the world demanded patience. "Who are we writing to today?" Samuel asked. Amelia smiled, her hands steadying the quill. "Grandmother first, then your cousin in the next town over." Emma frowned. "Why don't we send cards like everyone else?" "Cards are fast," her mother explained. "But letters carry more than speed. They carry thinking. They carry care. They carry presence." The children looked at one another and then back at the paper, understanding only a fraction of the weight in her words. In this household, letters were more than ink on paper. They were the tether to absent family, the quiet declaration that despite the cold, the snow, and the distance, someone had thought of you carefully, deliberately, and fully. Samuel held a small piece of folded paper in his hands. "Can I write something too?" Amelia considered it. "Yes, but slowly. Think about each word before it touches the page." He nodded seriously, biting the tip of his tongue as if that alone might sharpen his thoughts. Emma sat beside him, watching her mother's hand move over the page, her eyes following the rise and fall of letters as they formed words that would travel far beyond the frozen hills. Outside, the wind shifted slightly, pushing the snow against the windows in gentle taps that echoed like reminders. Attention matters. Effort matters. Thought matters. The quill moved again. Emilia wrote about small things. The brightness of the winter morning, the crispness of the air, the way Samuel's laugh had carried across the field even though the snow swallowed sound. She wrote about Emma and how carefully she had stacked the kindling beside the hearth so that the fire would take hold more easily. The next evening, she wrote about the family's meals, simple yet abundant in their attentiveness. She wrote of the quiet work in every corner of the house, the sewing, the mending, the stacking of wood, and how each act, though unnoticed by outsiders, was a testament to endurance, thought, and care. Samuel tried his hand at a sentence. "I hope you are warm," he wrote slowly. The quill trembled in his fingers. Emma decided she would draw a small star at the top of her pen, bright mark for someone who would not see it until days later. Time passed differently when writing letters. There was no rush, no thought of what might happen if the words were incomplete. Each moment in which ink touched paper became a meditation on presence, patience, and intimacy. When the letters were finally ready, they were folded and placed carefully into envelopes, sealed with wax that bore the faint impression of the family's small signet. Each letter was a quiet act of connection, intended to bridge the miles, the snow, and the winter's chill. The children watched as their mother and father placed each letter into a small basket for the town's postman, who would come at the end of the day. The basket seemed heavier than its contents, weighted by intention more than by paper. Samuel asked, "Do they know we are thinking of them already?" "Yes," Amelia said. "Even before the postman arrives, they know." Emma pressed her fingers to the smooth paper of her folded star letter. "Even if they can't read it yet?" she asked. Amelia nodded. "Even then. That's the power of letters. They speak beyond the moment they are read." The postman arrived eventually, boots soft on snow, his coat dusted with frost. He moved quietly, as if respecting the delicate labor of connection that had gone into each envelope. One by one, he lifted the letters from the basket, careful not to crush them, careful not to disturb the subtle folds, the care in every crease. In the distance, other families prepared their own letters. Across the town, the same ritual unfolded. In some homes, children practiced their letters for the first time. In others, grandparents wrote notes that had become tradition over decades. In all cases, writing replaced noise. Writing replaced rush. Writing replaced the desire to be immediately visible. There was still celebration that evening. Of course, meals were prepared. Candles were lit. Families gathered at the hearth to watch the fires dance, listening to its gentle crackle as if it were a companion. But even in these moments, the letters mattered most. They were the private recognition that the world beyond the house and the warmth of gathered bodice was inhabited by others who were also thinking, watching, waiting, and caring. When the evening had grown late and the children were sleepy, Amelia retrieved a small box from the top shelf. Inside were letters from years past, yellowed at the edges, faintly curling as though they still carried heat from hands long gone. She showed them to the children. "See," she said, "people have been reaching out like this for longer than you can imagine. They wrote not because they had to, but because they wished to." Samuel traced a finger along the faded words of his great. Emma pressed her cheek against her mother's arm and imagined the distant houses that had once received each letter. Each letter was a small story, each sentence a careful thought, and through all of them ran the quiet rhythm of family, continuity, and care. In that time, before cards and mass printing, letters were deliberate. They moved slowly. They were read slowly. They were cherished slowly. And the silence surrounding them became a part of the holiday itself, a companion to the warmth of the fire, the weight of the blankets, and the gentle company of those who had gathered near and those far away. When Samuel asked why no one sang while they wrote, Amelia explained, "Some songs are loud, but some songs live in quiet, in careful thought, in the stretching of words across miles. The letters are our songs today, even as night deepened." The children imagined the journey of each envelope as it crossed frozen fields and small towns, carried on the careful back of a postman, or tucked into a waiting hand at the far edge of the river. They imagined hands opening them and eyes reading slowly, smiling quietly, feeling a connection that needed no immediate sound to confirm it. Silence, they began to understand, was not emptiness. It was attention. It was care. It was presence that traveled across space, in ink and paper. And when the fire's glow finally softened to coals, the letters stacked neatly beside it, the children slept with dreams of distant homes, distant hands, and the quiet knowledge that thought, effort, and love had been sent into the world, reaching farther than voices ever could. Even as snow pressed against the windows, even as the wind whispered across the roof, and even as the deepest night gathered in the town, letters held their space, patient, deliberate, and alive with meaning. And in that stillness, Christmas existed, not a celebration alone, but as careful attention extended from house to house, family to family, across the expanse of snow and silence, moving at the speed of thought rather than the speed of sound, unfinished, awaiting the next story to follow its quiet path. The long walk to visit neighbors in deep winter snow. The snow lay thick and unbroken, a quiet blanket that stretched farther than the eye could see. Footprints from the morning had already begun to fade beneath fresh flur, leaving the world both familiar and strange. A landscape carved in shades of white and gray. Samuel and Emma pulled their coats tighter, scarves wrapped twice around their necks, and mittens that had grown stiff with cold. Their boots pressed deep into the snow with every step, each one a small negotiation with the weight of winter. Amelia walked ahead, her shawl tucked close, her eyes scanning the horizon where the neighboring houses peeked through the icy fog. "Do you think anyone will be awake?" Emma asked, her voice muffled beneath the wool scarf. "They have to be," Samuel said, kicking at a hidden branch to clear his path. "It's Christmas Eve." Amelia glanced back at them. "Winter is slow. People move slowly, too. You will know they are awake when you hear their steps." The journey to visit neighbors was not a quick one. Each house was spaced wide apart, connected by paths that were sometimes marked by previous travelers, sometimes hidden entirely beneath snowdrifts. The children learned early that deep winter made every distance longer, every hill steeper, every simple greeting a small triumph. The first house came into view after nearly an hour. Smoke curled faintly from the chimney, pale against the pale sky. The door opened before they even knocked. A neighbor, Mr. Lawson, stepped out, rubbing his hands together over a small bundle of coals. His breath rose in clouds. "Well, I'll be," he said, his voice low and kind. "Thought you might have given up halfway." "We couldn't," Amelia said. "It's too important." Samuel and Emma clutched their small parcels, homemade treats wrapped carefully in cloth, small tokens that carried both thought and warmth. "Come in, then," Mr. Lawson said. "The fire's still good. I haven't let it die for weeks now." Inside, the room smelled of pine and dried herbs. The hearth glowed faintly, a subdued warmth that was instantly comforting. Samuel carefully placed their gifts on a small table while Emma watched the flames flicker in quiet fascination. "Why do we walk so far instead of sending letters or cards?" Samuel asked quietly. Amelia smiled. "Because some things need your presence. Some things need your steps to mark the snow. Some things need you to see the faces of those you wish to connect with." Mr. Lawson nodded. "There's a difference in effort. A letter carries words, but a walk like yours carries warmth, thought, and you've shared yourself in a way ink never could." The children learned quickly that even the shortest visit took time. Conversations were slow, filled with pauses to listen to the fire, the wind outside, or the small creaks of a house settling under winter's weight. Gifts were accepted with gratitude that was neither loud nor exaggerated, but steady and enduring, like the coals that glowed in the hearth. When the visit ended, the snow outside had thickened further. Each footprint the children left behind was deeper, heavier, a testament to the care they carried through each stride. The wind pressed against their faces, but they moved on, unguided by both purpose and the quiet knowledge that others awaited them on the path ahead. The next house was across a shallow hill. The climb was slow. Samuel's boots sank deeper than before. Emma's scarf snagged on a low branch. Each obstacle was met with patience, each slip forgiven and adjusted without complaint. In deep winter, the world itself demanded a certain humility. They reached the doorstep of the miller, family just as the afternoon light began to soften. Inside, the warmth smelled of fresh bread and simmering stew. Children of the Miller household pressed close to the hearth, and the exchange of greetings was careful, deliberate. Hugs were given sparingly, smiles carefully weighed. The children of both families understood the value of restraint. Winter taught them that exuberance wasted warmth and attention. "Why don't we visit more often?" Emma whispered to Samuel when no one else was listening. "Because walking this far is part of the gift," he said. "Because showing up matters more than just being remembered." Amelia handed small parcels to each family member. The children watched as a simple gift, a carved wooden bird, a small cloth doll, a bag of nuts, was received with genuine delight. It was not the size of the gift, but the effort of their journey that mattered most. The path to the next household became even more difficult. Snowdrifts rose taller, wind gusted with sharper cold, and the horizon blurred into a seamless gray. The children's cheeks were flushed, their legs heavy, their breath visible in the frozen air. But they continued. Each step reinforced the rhythm of the winter walk. Each pause became an opportunity to marvel at the quiet expanse around them. Amelia led them carefully, pointing out small animal tracks, frozen streams, and the way snow clung to branches as if holding them gently in place. "Notice these," she said. "They remind us that even in deep cold, life continues. Even in hardship, beauty persists." The third and fourth households welcomed them in similar ways. Fire-warmed rooms. Conversations lingered over cups of weak tea. Small tokens were exchanged with careful gratitude. Every visit reminded the children that effort, patience, and deliberate movement were as vital as warmth itself. Night began to settle slowly, casting long shadows across the snow. The journey home was the longest of all. The path back was heavier under the fresh accumulation of snow, footprints of the outgoing journey now partially erased. Yet the children moved on, one careful step after another, understanding that endurance in winter was both literal and symbolic. At one point, Samuel slipped, nearly falling into a soft drift. Emma caught him by the sleeve. They laughed softly, not from joy alone, but from relief. Amelia looked back at them, her eyes reflecting the faint glow of the emerging moon. "Winter teaches patience," she said. "It teaches kindness to ourselves and to others. It teaches the value of each step." By the time they returned to their home, their bodies were exhausted, but their spirits steady. The snow-covered path behind them was a testament to the day, a silent record of effort, thought, and shared purpose. The house smelled faintly of smoke and candle wax, welcoming them back into warmth and safety. Inside, the children removed their boots, shaking snow from coats and scarves. The fire in the hearth had been banked to the perfect glow, as if waiting to reward the travelers for their perseverance. The gifts they had delivered now carried a story of effort that letters alone could never tell. Amelia placed her hands gently on their shoulders. "You've learned something today," she said. "A walk in winter is not just about reaching another house. It's about showing that you care enough to brave cold, distance, and fatigue. That effort carries warmth in ways words sometimes cannot." Samuel and Emma nodded, their faces flushed from cold and satisfaction alike. They understood, though only partially, that the quiet exertion of traveling through deep snow was a gift in itself, a presence offered deliberately, step by step, to people who mattered. Later, as snow continued to fall gently outside, they settled near the fire. Samuel traced his fingers over the smooth surface of the wooden bird they had given. Emma held her cloth doll close. Both carried a quiet pride. They had moved through winter, connected hearts, and witnessed the subtle magic of giving through effort, presence, and intention. The long walk, though exhausting, had become an invisible thread tying homes together, linking families through shared acknowledgement of cold, care, and thoughtful attention. Each footprint left behind in the snow was a message of love, patience, and presence that no letter, no card, and no song could fully convey. Even as darkness grew and the town settled into its hushed evening, the children understood Christmas was not merely about celebration. It was about showing up, walking through challenges, enduring discomfort, and carrying the warmth of thought and effort into the homes of those who awaited you quietly, patiently, and without complaint. And as the night deepened, with snow pressing gently against the windows and wind whispering across the roof, Samuel and Emma drifted to sleep with a new understanding. The rhythm of footsteps in snow, the weight of cold air, and the deliberate pace of winter journeys had taught them a lesson they would carry long after the season passed. That love is often measured not in gifts alone, but in the care with which we show up, step by step, for one another. Unfinished, awaiting continuation with the next story segment. How lanterns lit the darkness of early American roads. The roads were dark, silent ribbons of frozen earth stretching beyond the reach of the last lingering light. Snow lay deep, muffling the world, turning each footstep into a deliberate mark, each sound into a cautious echo. In such hours when the sun had long gone behind the low horizon, lanterns became more than lights. They became guides, companions, and quiet promises of safety. Dot Amelia carried one such lantern, its flame dancing gently behind glass, casting warm reflections on the freshly fallen snow. Samuel and Emma followed closely, each step slowing to avoid tripping in the uneven drifts. The lantern's glow flickered on their faces, softening the sharp edges of fatigue and cold. "These lights make it feel like the road is awake," Emma said softly. "Like someone is watching over us." Amelia smiled. "That's exactly what they do." Long before roads had lamps, people relied on lanterns to guide travelers safely home. Each flame was a small mercy against the vast darkness. The town was quiet. Most families had retreated indoors, the wind outside too bitter for lingering conversations. Yet along the main path, lanterns hung from posts, from windowsills, and from iron hooks beside doors, casting pools of amber that scattered across the snow. Each home contributed its own modest light, a fragment of assurance to anyone journeying through the cold. Samuel adjusted his grip on the lantern rope, careful not to let the light sway too violently. He had learned from previous nights that a steady flame mattered as much as the walker holding it. One sudden gust of wind could snuff out warmth, leaving a child alone in darkness, shivering and disoriented. "This is why people respected the winter roads," Amelia said. Every traveler knew that a lantern was not just a convenience. It was a gesture of trust, a message. You are expected. You are watched. You are not alone. They walked past houses with windows darkened for evening prayers and early sleep. In some, faint glimmers of candlelight hinted at activity inside. A mother knitting by a hearth. A father carving small gifts at a table. Children whispering to one another. Yet the lanterns outside were the only beacons for those moving through snow, bearing gifts, or simply returning home from the day's work. Samuel's thoughts wandered as he followed the lantern's glow along the path. He imagined the long line of travelers who had walked these roads before him, merchants, children like himself, all guided by flickering flames, all bound by the silent agreement that light must accompany life on winter nights. The lanterns themselves were simple. Iron frames, glass panes, wicks trimmed carefully to burn evenly. Oil was precious, so each flame was nurtured with attention. A guttering lantern was not merely inconvenient, it could be dangerous. Darkness had teeth in these parts. Snow concealed obstacles, hidden ditches, uneven boards, and the faintest drop could turn a journey into disaster. Emma shivered, and Amelia leaned closer, brushing a stray lock of hair from the girl's face. "See?" she said, pointing ahead. "The Lamberts' lantern burns bright tonight. Their path joins ours in spirit, if not in footsteps. All these lights make the road ours to walk safely." As they proceeded, shadows stretched long across the drifts, cast by trees and fences, flickering in rhythm with the lanterns. The interplay of light and dark made familiar roads feel strange, mysterious, Every stretch of path became an adventure, every footstep a negotiation with the unseen, every lantern a reassurance that guidance existed in the silence. Along the route, Amelia occasionally paused to adjust a lantern hanging from a post. Some had swung loose in the wind, threatening to extinguish entirely. Each adjustment was quiet work, deliberate and careful, performed without fuss, so as not to disturb the delicate balance of light against snow. Samuel and Emma watched, learning that care was as essential as courage in winter nights. Occasionally, a traveler from a distant farm would appear, a lantern of their own in hand. Greetings were exchanged in soft murmurs, acknowledgement of shared struggle and shared warmth. In those brief encounters, the children glimpsed how roads were more than physical connections. They were conduits of empathy, binding neighbors and strangers in mutual understanding of endurance and attention. They crossed the frozen creek carefully, following the line of lanterns set along the narrow bridge. The ice beneath groaned faintly with their weight, a subtle reminder of the fragility of passage. Emma's hand found Samuel's, clutching it unconsciously as the lantern flame cast dancing shadows across the crystalline surface. Amelia led them steadily, her own lantern blazing a steady pulse. "Do you think the lanterns ever go out entirely?" Emma whispered. Amelia shook her head. "Not if the people care. Someone always tends the flame. That's why the roads never feel truly dark. The light moves ahead of you, behind you, beside you, even if you cannot see it all at once." By the time they reached the bend near the old Miller barn, the moon had risen, silvering the snow with a faint glow. Yet even with moonlight, the lanterns were essential. Their warmth was tangible in a way that silver alone could not provide. Each home they passed contributed a thread of light to the tapestry of winter roads. Samuel imagined the lanterns lining the paths for centuries, generation after generation, fathers guiding children, neighbors helping strangers, travelers lighting lamps to signal safety. In his mind, the flickering flames became almost alive, each one a sentinel watching over the night, each one a heartbeat in the long rhythm of community care. At the final stretch, where the road twisted between two hills, the wind grew fiercer, whipping snow into swirling curtains. Lanterns flared, threatened, but did not falter. Amelia lifted hers higher, shielding the flame from gusts. Samuel and Emma followed, each holding their own light, small beacons in a world that seemed momentarily entombed. At last, the children's home came into view, its single lantern in the window a promise of return and completion. The warmth of fire within could not replace the reassurance of the outside lights, which had guided them steadily through cold and shadow. They entered the threshold with quiet gratitude, understanding fully for the first time why lanterns were more than tools, were lifelines, symbols, and companions. Inside, boots and scarves were removed, the lanterns set aside to rest, their work done for the night. But the children knew they would never forget the lesson of winter roads, that even in the deepest darkness, the careful attention of others, gentle tending of a small flame could make a path safe, comforting, and alive. As they settled near the hearth, Amelia whispered, "Never underestimate a light in darkness. It guides more than eyes it guides hearts." And in that moment, Samuel and Emma understood. The long winter roads, the biting cold, and the flickering lanterns were more than a practical necessity. They were a demonstration of care, vigilance, and shared human endurance, a testament to the quiet, persistent love that sustained life in early America's winter nights. Unfinished. awaiting continuation with the next story segment. The taste of warm cider on slow, quiet evenings. The house settled into evening with a gentle sigh, the weight of snow pressing silently against the windows. The wind softened to a steady murmur. In the kitchen, a kettle hissed softly over the embers of the hearth. Amelia poured spiced cider into thick ceramic mugs, the steam rising in lazy swirls, curling upward like warm fingers reaching for the ceiling. Samuel and Emma watched, eyes wide with anticipation, noses brushing the rising aroma that spoke of apples, cinnamon, and long-simmered memories. "Nothing warms you faster than cider," Amelia said, setting a mug before each of them, especially on nights like these, when the world outside feels endless in white and cold. Samuel lifted the rim, feeling the heat seep through the mug into his fingers. The first sip was a revelation. Sweet, spiced, familiar. A liquid hug that traveled from lips to belly, settling deep into bones, chilled by the long walk home. Emma cradled her mug, eyes half closed, the faintest sigh of contentment escaping her. Evening stretched slowly, each minute measured by the gentle ticking of the clock and the subtle shifting of warmth in the room. The cider's taste lingered on tongues, each sip carrying with it more than flavor. It held stories of orchards harvested in autumn, the labor of pressing apples, the careful stirring of sugar and spice, the memory of family hands working together. In this simple drink was the quiet intimacy of home, of shared time, of the slow pleasure of living fully in one another's presence. Amelia poured another round, the rich amber liquid, catching the dim firelight. "Cider isn't just a drink," she said softly. "It's an invitation to pause, to remember that the day's troubles, cold roads, heavy snow, fatigue, softness, we sit, even briefly, and taste something simple, something good." Samuel sipped again, noticing the way the warmth expanded within him, not just across his chest but through the careful calm of the room. Outside, snow pressed against the panes in soft weight, muffling the world. Yet inside, the kitchen hummed quietly with the pulse of hearth, hands, and quiet companionship. Emma, small hands wrapped around her mug, murmured, "It tastes like Christmas feels." Her voice was barely more than a whisper, but Amelia caught it, smiled, and nodded. There was truth in that, flavors and warmth intertwined with memory, with ritual, with the quiet celebration of simply being together. The fire crackled gently as the children sat near it, mugs warming their hands, bodies relaxed after the exertions of the day. Each sip of cider slowed the pace of thought, slowed the rhythm of breath, made the silence between words comfortable, even sweet. This was the unspoken joy of winter evenings. Warmth, flavor, and quiet. A deliberate step away from haste and noise. Amelia joined them with her own mug, sitting against the hearth. She lifted it in a small toast, eyes soft. 2 quiet evenings, 2 warm cider, and to the moments that remind us why we endure the cold outside. The children clinked their mugs lightly against hers, the sound subdued, almost ceremonial. Each sip reinforced a lesson often overlooked. That pleasure need not be grandiose, that comfort need not be loud, that love and warmth were often measured in the slow, steady, simple acts of togetherness. Outside, the night pressed on, snow deepening, stars barely visible behind the heavy clouds. But inside, the kitchen glowed with gentle light, with the curl of cider steam, with soft conversation. Words were minimal, but presence was abundant. Each pause, each gentle glance, each soft exhale of contentment was part of a rhythm, older than the children could know, but that they felt instinctively. Samuel and Emma shared small observations in hushed tones about the way cinnamon stuck to the rim, about the warmth traveling down from hands into chests, about how quiet the world outside had become. These exchanges were not hurried, not competitive, not demanding attention. They were leisurely, intentional, and full of an awareness that time spent noticing the ordinary could feel extraordinary. Another sip, and Emma's small voice whispered, "I could stay like this forever." "You could," Amelia said softly, "if you let yourself. There is magic in slowing down, in tasting life with all your senses. The cider carries more than spice it, carries the memory of those who made it, of those who waited for you, of the slow, steady love of home." The fire's red glow danced across their faces, mingling with the amber warmth of cider. Outside, the wind sang against the eaves, but inside, the world had softened. Time, effort, and snowfall all paused at the kitchen door, leaving only the warmth of hearth, of drink, of careful, slow presence. Samuel set down his mug for a moment, eyes fixed on the flames. "It's strange," he murmured, "how something so simple can feel so much." Amelia nodded. "That's the nature of quiet evenings. It isn't about extravagance. It's about noticing, about savoring, about understanding that life is often sweetest in these small, deliberate moments." Emma's cheeks were flushed from the warmth, her hair curling softly from the steam rising around her. She leaned against her mother, holding the mug close. "I think I understand why people remember evenings like this," she whispered. "Even if nothing big happens, it stays with you." Indeed, the warmth of cider, like the quiet companionship of hearth and family, seeped into memory. It was a slow, deliberate teaching, patience, attention, and savoring each simple joy. The children felt it in their fingers, in their toes, in their hearts. They would recall the flavor, the aroma, the gentle heat in years to come, even as snow continued to fall elsewhere. The night deepened, each sip of cider accompanied by soft conversation, gentle laughter, and quiet reflection. Every taste was a thread woven into the tapestry of winter, of home, endurance, shared warmth, and the subtle magic of stillness. Samuel and Emma learned that joy could be found not in loud celebration, but in the careful savoring of a moment fully lived, fully shared. Amelia poured the last of the cider slowly, as if to extend the evening just a little longer. The mugs were refilled, hands warmed, and the children leaned back, content, knowing that the world outside could rage with cold and wind. But here, in the kitchen, life was measured by taste, by warmth, and by quiet care. And as the night stretched on, Samuel and Emma realized the deeper lesson that the slow, quiet evenings, punctuated by small comforts like warm cider, were the foundation upon which memory, love, and connection were built. That sometimes the simplest flavors carried the greatest weight, and the gentlest acts of attention could leave the most lasting imprint. Unfinished, awaiting continuation with the next story segment. Snowstorms that made the world feel smaller and safer. The snowstorm began slowly, almost unnoticed at first, few scattered flakes drifting down like pale feathers, clinging briefly to window panes before melting away. But by evening, the sky had thickened into a solid gray, a curtain of snowflakes falling steadily, weaving the world into a quilt of white. The wind whispered against the house, tugging gently at shutters, carrying the faint scent of pine and frost. Outside, The familiar world transformed. Fences disappeared under trees were cloaked in white. Roads vanished beneath seamless layers of snow. Inside, the family gathered near the hearth. Samuel and Emma pressed close to one another, mugs of warm cider resting forgotten on the table as their eyes followed the snow swirling past the windows. The storm outside was relentless, yet oddly comforting. Its soft, constant noise creating a barrier between the house and the wider, harsher world beyond. Each gust seemed to fold the town a little closer together, each swirl of snow making the familiar landscape smaller, contained, and safe. Amelia drew a thick shawl around her shoulders and sat beside the children. "Storms like this," she said softly, "make the world smaller. Not smaller in danger, but in the sense that everything that matters is within reach. The walls, the fire, the people you love, they are enough." Samuel tilted his head, watching the snow blind the far fields. "It's strange," he said. "Out there, it looks endless, but somehow, being inside makes it smaller, like the storm wraps us up in a blanket." To Emma, nodded, "And safer," she added. "It's like the wind and snow are saying, you stay here, warm and safe. The outside can wait." The room glowed with firelight, shadows dancing across walls, merging and stretching with the flicker of flames. The storm's rhythm, its steady descent of snow, the faint tapping against window panes, was both a lullaby and a reminder of the world beyond, which had been momentarily softened, muted, and slowed. Time itself seemed to compress. Hours could stretch yet pass unnoticed, measured only by the deepening snow outside or the rising and falling of breath within. Samuel leaned against the hearth, listening to the storm, feeling the hush that settled over the town. "It's almost like the world stopped," he whispered. "Like it's only us here." Amelia smiled, brushing a loose strand of hair from his forehead. "That's part of the beauty," she said. "A storm can quiet the chaos, can make the infinite manageable. It reminds us of what matters most." The children's eyes followed the shadows outside. The way snowflakes twisted in wind currents, the occasional ghostly outline of a tree trunk or shapes became abstract, softened, transformed. Samuel imagined the storm as a giant hand, gently pressing the world into a small, contained form of space where nothing urgent could intrude, a sanctuary shaped by cold and quiet. Emma reached for her cup of cider again, the warmth radiating through her fingers, mingling with the fire's heat. "I like storms like this," she said, "even though they're big and scary outside. Inside it's calm. It feels like the house is hugging us." Amelia nodded. "Exactly. Snowstorms remind us that shelter isn't just walls and roofs, it's the feeling of protection, of togetherness, of being contained within warmth while the outside rages." Her voice was soft, almost blending with the crackle of fire and the whisper of snow against glass. Samuel's mind wandered to the long walk they had taken earlier in the day. Footprints pressed into deep drifts, the wind tugging at scarves, the cold gnawing at toes. "Do storms make the walk harder?" he asked. "Or easier in a way?" Amelia considered this. "They make it both," she said. "Harder because snow is heavy and cold. Easier because they remind us of why the walk matters. We move through difficulty, and yet we have a place to return to, a hearth, warmth, and each other." Emma leaned her head against her mother's shoulder. "It feels like the storm is telling stories," she whispered. "Stories about the trees, the roads, the world slowing down." Outside, the snow deepened. Each flake added to the growing white blanket, a quiet architecture of nature. Fences disappeared, roads erased themselves, and familiar landmarks melted into ghostly shapes. The town shrank, not physically, but perceptually. Distances felt less imposing, dangers more distant, the infinite compressed into the safe, glowing sphere of the home. Samuela imagined neighbors' houses as small islands in the white sea, fires glowing through frosted windows. The thought was comforting. He realized that the storm, in its relentless quiet, united everyone under the same blanket of snow, binding the town together invisibly. Danger might be real, yes, but it was softened, postponed, contained. The world outside became smaller because care, warmth, and presence outweighed distance, cold, and silence. Amelia stood and adjusted the kettle, the hiss of boiling liquid blending seamlessly with the storm. Even storms teach lessons, she said. They remind us that life is both big and small, harsh and gentle, distant and close. They show us that what truly matters, safety, warmth, family, can survive and thrive even when the world outside grows wild. Samuel and Emma listened, eyes wide, absorbing the rhythm of words, fire, and snow. They sipped their cider, feeling warmth coil through fingers, chest, and toes, anchoring them in the safe, small universe of home. Each gust against the windows reinforced the lesson. The storm could rage, but here they were contained, protected, and together. As night deepened, the storm continued its work, pressing the world into quiet, white silence. Lights in distant homes glimmered. Smoke rose lazily from chimneys, but each house felt like its own tiny universe, safe and small within the vast, snowy landscape. The children curled closer to Amelia, feeling the comfort of both presence and perspective. That even the greatest storm could make the world feel smaller, slower, and, paradoxically, safer. They watched the snow in silence, allowing each flake to imprint itself on memory, the way it twirled, fell, and vanished, the way it blurred boundaries and softened edges. It was a lesson in impermanence and intimacy, in the way vast, uncontrollable forces could produce quiet, deliberate comfort. Outside, the world might have been enormous, cold, and daunting, but inside, every heartbeat, every breath, every mug of cider and flicker of firelight shaped a world small enough to hold, safe enough to trust, and warm enough to cherish. Unfinished, awaiting continuation with the next story segment.
The calm that entered homes as the year drew to an end. As the year drew to a close, a rare stillness settled over the town, almost tangible in its weight and calm. The storms had passed, the snow had softened into gentle drifts, and the world seemed to exhale after months of movement and hardship. Inside homes, fires glowed steadily, flickering softly against the walls, casting long shadows that crept lazily across floors. Families gathered near the hearth, the rhythm of the fire echoing the gentle heartbeat of the rooms. Samuel and Emma sat cross-legged on a woven rug, mugs of warm cider cradled in their hands, the steam rising slowly, curling into the air like smoke signals of comfort. Amelia adjusted the blanket around her shoulders, her eyes reflecting the warm glow of the hearth. "There's a special kind of calm at the end of the year," she said softly. "It's a pause between what has passed and what will come, a chance to rest before new days arrive." The children listened, feeling the resonance of her words in the stillness that filled the room. Outside, the wind had quieted, the trees were still, and even the faint rustle of leaves had ceased. It was a calm that seemed to stretch infinitely, filling corners and spaces usually ignored during the hustle of daily life. Samuel took a sip of his cider, savoring its sweetness mingled with a gentle tartness. "It feels like the house itself is breathing," he said, "like it's noticing the end of the year, too." Amelia smiled. "Exactly. Homes have their own rhythms, their own ways of marking time. The walls remember laughter, whispers, footsteps. They hold moments quietly, and sometimes, in moments like these, that memory comes alive as a gentle calm." Emma leaned against the hearth, listening to the faint crackle of the fire. "I like how everything feels slower now," she said. "Even our thoughts. They aren't rushing, just resting." Outside, the snow glistened under the pale winter sun, the white landscape stretching into soft, undisturbed horizons. The town appeared smaller, contained, as if the calm of each home had extended outward, touching streets, fences, and trees with a subtle, invisible hand. The familiar world felt gentle, almost protective, a sanctuary from the year's lingering worries. Amelia poured herself a small cup of cider, its warmth spreading through her hands. The calm at the end of the year isn't just quiet, it's a presence, a reminder that despite all challenges, there is stability, there is warmth, there is family, there is always something to hold on to even as time moves forward. Samuel traced patterns on the wooden floor, the warmth from the fire soaking through his socks. "It feels different from the calm after a storm. That one felt safe because we were protected from the wind. This one, it feels safe because we've survived, because we're here." Emma nodded. "And because we know we'll keep going. We've made it through the year, together." The room was filled with small, subtle sounds. The crackle of logs, the faint whistle of wind through a distant chimney, the soft clink of ceramic mugs on the hearth. These sounds formed a symphony of calm, a quiet orchestration that marked the transition from one year to the next. There was no urgency, no expectation, only presence, shared and steady. Amelia looked at the children, noting the way the firelight painted their faces in gentle shades of gold and amber. "There's a beauty in endings," she said, "not in sadness, but in reflection, a chance to see how far we've come, to rest in the progress we've made, and to gather strength for what comes next." Samuel set his mug down and leaned back, his eyes following the slow dancing sparks that floated from the hearth. "I think that's why I love this time," he said. "It doesn't demand anything from us. We can just be." Emma smiled, pulling her knees closer. "Being is enough. Right now, that's all we need." Outside, the town seemed suspended, the frozen landscape untouched by time. Smoke drifted lazily from chimneys, lights glimmered in windows, and the faint echo of a distant bell suggested movement, life, and continuity. Yet inside each home, a calm deeper than any storm, deeper than any snow, had settled. A calm born of survival, of togetherness, of the closing of a chapter. Amelia reached for the children's hands, holding them gently. "Remember this feeling," she said. "The world can be chaotic and the days can be long, but moments like this remind us that we have shelter, warmth, and each other. That's what carries us forward." Samuel closed his eyes and let the warmth of the fire and the weight of the calm envelop him. Emma rested her head on her mother's shoulder, feeling the steady heartbeat of home and family. And that quiet, the year's troubles seemed distant, softened into memory, and the promise of the coming days felt both mysterious and reassuring. The calm was not loud, nor did it announce itself. It seeped slowly, filling every room, every heart, every shared glance with the gentle insistence that life continued, that endings could be gentle, that presence and warmth could conquer the chill of time and uncertainty. It was a lesson in patience, in quiet strength, in the power of simply being together. As twilight deepened, the fire's glow stretched across the room, shadows lengthening and blending into the corners. The children sipped the last of their cider, savoring the sweetness that lingered in their mouths, the warmth lingering in their hands. Outside, the snow mirrored the soft hush inside, a world blanketed and quiet, waiting for the new year to begin. Amelia's voice, low and steady, filled the space between crackles and sighs. Endings are gentle if we let them be. Calm enters where it is welcomed, and the end of a year is the perfect time to welcome it. Samuel and Emma exchanged a glance, understanding the depth of her words without fully grasping them. Yet even in their partial understanding, they felt the truth, that calm was not something that happened outside, nor something given by circumstances. It was something nurtured inside homes, hearts, and moments shared, a gift as enduring as any passed from one generation to the next. The final hours of the year drew closer. Outside, shadows lengthened, stars blinked faintly through the thinning clouds, and the world seemed to pause. Inside, the hearth held its steady glow, cider cups were refilled, and quiet conversation mingled with laughter so soft it felt like a secret shared only with the walls. The calm of the year's end was complete, not forced, not fleeting, but deep, lasting, and gentle. Unfinished, awaiting continuation with the final 20th story segment. A gentle memory of Christmas before the world became loud. The fire had dimmed to a soft glow, the last embers settling like tiny stars across the hearth. Samuel and Emma sat quietly, their mugs empty now, hands resting in their laps, eyes wandering to the frosted window panes. Outside, the snow lay untouched, each flake a tiny reminder of stillness and time suspended. Amelia's voice, soft and steady, carried across the room. "Do you remember last year?" she asked, a faint smile touching her lips. "Before the world grew louder, before the rush and noise of everything beyond these walls, this is what Christmas felt like." Samuel tilted his head, thinking back. It felt slower, like the whole day could breathe. Emma nodded, eyes bright with memory. "And warmer," she added, "not just because of the fire, but because of being together." Amelia leaned back, allowing herself a moment in the quiet, letting her gaze rest on the children. "That's the gift," she said softly. "Not the presents, the music, or the bustle outside, but these gentle moments, when everything is hushed and the world seems to hold its breath. That's the Christmas I want you to remember." The children leaned closer, drawn to her words as if they were the softest of blankets. Outside, the wind was absent, the town held in a perfect stillness. Each home was a sanctuary, each room a small universe where voices, warmth, and love carried more weight than any sound or spectacle beyond the walls. Time felt slower here, as if it too had been invited to sit quietly and watch. Samuel imagined himself stepping back into the streets of years past, when carriages rolled slowly over crisp snow, lanterns swayed in doorways, and children's laughter rose unhurried through the cold air. The world had been quieter then, not because it was empty, but because attention moved differently. The small gestures mattered more, the shared smiles lingered longer, and the simple act of being present was the celebration itself. Emma traced patterns in the condensation on the window pane. "I like it," she said. "I like Christmas before it became loud." Amelia reached over, tucking a strand of hair behind Emma's ear. "That's why we remember, so that even when the world becomes louder, you carry this calm within you. You carry the quiet, the warmth, the presence. That doesn't fade. even if everything outside does. The room held its hush, the children listening to the occasional pop of the dwindling embers, the slow sigh of the house settling in its frame. Each sound was magnified in its gentleness, a quiet echo of what had always been important: family, warmth, and attention given without hurry. The world beyond might rush, grow noisy and demand, but here, in this room, there was only peace. Samuel leaned against Amelia, eyes half closed. "I think I understand," he murmured. "Even when things get loud outside, we can make a quiet inside." Emma nodded, a soft smile spreading across her face. "A quiet we can carry anywhere." Amelia held them both for a moment longer, allowing the warmth and calm to fill the space completely. Exactly. And that's why Christmas before the world became loud is worth remembering. It teaches us patience, attention, and care. It reminds us that the best gifts are often invisible, felt in steps, glances, and quiet shared moments. The world beyond might rush, grow noisy, and demand, but here, in this room, there was only peace. The outside stars appeared slowly, faint pinpricks and light against the soft dark of a winter sky. The snow reflected their glow, a mirror of the quiet inside. Samuel and Emma watched, drinking in the stillness, the memory, the gentle lesson that even as years pass and the world grows louder, this quiet, deliberate presence could always be found and carried forward.